superintendents, Linda Myers and Dr. Sproles, and I'll walk you through the first couple of slides before they begin their presentation. And again, if you could hold questions to the end, I think some of the things will be answered, and then we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible along the way. And I also believe Director Kylo has access to all the materials. Is that okay? All right, so just as a reminder, this Student Success Act is rooted in equity, authentic engagement, and shared accountability for student success. We thought it was good to orient ourselves for that. You'll see some academic metrics, you'll see some social emotional metrics, but we do have to move the mark for our kids. The next slide just provides the 4 buckets of allowable expenses: class size, well-rounded education, instructional time, and health and safety. And you'll see if you get into our budget narrative that on the first page of the more major budget document, it shows you what dollar amount we have in each of the buckets. So we've been required to show it to you in a couple different ways, and then we did a couple different looks at the data or the expenditures for ourselves that we'll present along the way. Just one more quick slide. As a reminder, the purposes of the student investment account: to meet student mental and behavioral health, increase academic achievement and reduce academic disparities, and authentic stakeholder engagement. The targeted student populations as set by ODE for us. We do have to identify the performance metrics. What you'll see in your application is that the actual performance metrics are blank. We've set our outcomes, but we haven't set our targets yet, because that's that process with ODE after you approve the application. And we also needed to identify evidence-based, and it needed to be connected to outcomes and our performance targets. So that's how we've oriented you to throughout the slides and throughout our presentations. Here's are the metrics we want to move. Here's our plan for how we'd like to move those metrics. With that, I'm going to turn it over, I think it looks like first to Assistant Superintendent Myers to begin.
Superintendent Perry. Good evening, Chair Hyen and Board of Directors. We're going to spend just a very few minutes talk through testing. Oh, okay.
Nope. It's been a long night with a scratchy microphone.
Did Bob touch it and fix it when he walked by?
Look at that.
He did. Wow.
I guess he doesn't trust that fix is going to work. Thank you for coming here tonight.
Excellent. Okay, I think we are back on track. As I was saying, we're going to do just a very, very few slides of overview and reminding you how we got to this place. We will be spending a majority of our time this evening actually in the application and specifically looking at the details associated with that. But this is just a linear visual reminding you of the steps in the process. And so tonight is actually step 5. You'll see that we have already completed the authentic community engagement, and the task force presented their priorities to Superintendent Perry. You received those last week. And we're going to share some information about the implementation teams and the work that they did, all of that moving forward into the actual development of the application itself. So, you heard a lot about the task force process. Co-facilitators Dr. Richardson and Adriana Miranda gave you a very thorough presentation last week of the work that the task force completed, how that connected the community engagement information and brought that to you a set of priorities that were presented to Superintendent Perry. After the task force, we convened what we called implementation teams. These groups were co-facilitated by external agencies, and so we consulted with consultants to come in and lead teams that consisted of staff members in the district, but specifically including people who had already served on the task force. So the thought process behind the implementation team was, how can a group of people, including those who served on the task force, serve as a bridge to get us from the task force priorities into the specific details of how and what are we going to do to meet the priorities and recommendations that came out of the task force. So, for instance, as we were ready to really engage in conversations about additional mental health supports for students, we heard that very clearly from the community. ODE has supported that as one of the metrics, and the task force sent that forth as a priority. We used the implementation team to bring in some of our staff members who work on a daily basis in the social emotional arena, members of our Office of Behavioral Learning, which you have heard about before, to sit down and have conversations about what metrics could we use to measure improvement in social emotional health, and what sorts of strategies and things could we implement to improve social emotional health for students. Craig is going to give you some specific details about the work that came out of the implementation teams, but we haven't spent a lot of time talking about those as this bridge between task force and the actual application. So I wanted you to know that that's the role that the implementation teams were intended to serve. So the implementation teams, when they came together, started with the work of the task force. So as the task force finished up and submitted their priorities, the implementation team took those priorities and moved forward. And remember, the priorities that came from the task force were collected in 3 categories. We had universal priorities, which were important to respond to on behalf of all of our students and all of the subgroups that we specifically were looking at. We had strategic priorities, which were relevant to several of the subgroups, and we had targeted priorities, which maybe were places where we needed to fill a gap and or provide a targeted resource to a very small population of students. The task force sent the priorities in those categories, and the implementation team began working through those in those same categories. In addition, the implementation team then had to begin to struggle with the metrics that were directed from ODE. So we heard from the community, the task force took all of that information, and then we had to lay that right next to the requirements coming from ODE. We showed this to you last week. As a reminder, the column on the left is ODE's requirements for what metrics we must report progress on. But districts are allowed the opportunity to add additional metrics based upon our individual district data. So the ones that are now highlighted in red, those are the 5 metrics that we believe most strongly correlate to the needs across our district. Those also match, in some stronger than others, but those also match things that we started to hear from families during our community engagement. So as we walk through the plan tonight, you will see those 5 red highlighted metrics highlighted throughout the plan, and you will hear specific references to what the community told us. So again, the work of the implementation team and the final draft of the application that you have in front of you is a combination of both of those requirements gelled together and laid beside one another to land us with a final product. So Greg's going to give you some more details on the implementation team work specifically.
So as Linda was talking about, we had 2 different implementation teams to begin to link what we heard from our community with the priorities, what ODE has told us that we need to have for performance measures, and then how do we make sense of that with our district. So one of the teams was focused specifically on academics and how, because remember, the student investment account is broken up into 2 large categories, academics and socio-emotional health. So we broke our implementation teams up into those 2 broad categories. As we've talked about in the past, and we have several people here who served on the academic team or the socio-emotional team, can we just have you raise your hand if you're willing to be recognized? And again, so we had people serving on both. We had community partners serving on our socio-emotional team as well. And for the academics, the ODE identified pretty clearly what the performance targets are. So our academic group was able to look at evidence-based practices related to each of those categories that ODE had identified and start to parse out what do we know from research that we can use to implement to move the dial for our kids academically. So what you see here are the top 6 strategies that the group came to, and these are rank ordered. And so number 1 received the most votes. It actually, the list of strategies goes down to 15 or 16. And if you'd like, you could reference this in your board notebook. The summary report for both implementation teams are in your notebooks that you have before you.
And
but
I'm
they-
going to interrupt 1 minute, and they're also available online.
Okay, so they're available online if you'd like to reference that online. You can see the whole list of strategies. There's a whole bunch of them. I'll give you a second to get there. Okay, so the top strategy that was rank ordered by the implementation teams related to academic work is providing quality professional development that is focused, ongoing, and job embedded. And that links closely to the research for what we know about adult learners are that a one and done training doesn't work. That it's hard to go to a training and then implement that back in the classroom or back in your school-based team. And so ongoing job-embedded professional development is key. We also heard from our communities, you remember, one of our universal priorities that we heard from our families time and time again is to providing teachers with really strong quality professional development on how to teach their kids. So there was a strong linkage between those two. We heard from the team a lot of, as well about multi-tiered systems of support, which you can remember we talked about that last week at the board meeting as well. And that speaks to the need to not have just something placed here and something placed here, but to have a system of support across. And so that's what we heard from the academic team. Again, this is highly correlated to an effective practice. We heard from the team about adding specialized staff specifically to reduce caseloads. And this is something we heard from this, and then you'll hear this again for the socio-emotional teams as well, about the need to add specialized staff, particularly for our special education teachers, but other teachers as well were mentioned. The fourth one is increasing instructional time for struggling learners. And that can look like lots of different things. The academic team talked a lot about doing that before and after school. So how can we extend opportunities for kids to have access to content? But they also talked about that once you fail a class, particularly in high school, how can we get you back on track in a timely fashion so you can get back on track to learning? So that was the increased instructional time, and it was really increasing instructional opportunities as well for struggling learners. We heard a lot about expanding CTE and access to these programs. And those of you who participated in the listening sessions, we heard a lot about this in our community as well. And so we have some barriers to accessing CTE classes that we talked with the academic implementation team that are important for us to address. Again, it's that notion of access across our system. And then the sixth one was focusing specifically on class size reduction at our higher poverty schools. So we looked a little bit at the research on class size reduction and what the research tells us about that and who it impacts the most. And that's why the group came to focusing on higher poverty schools, which again, you'll remember is in line with the student investment account, which has targeted supports for some, not universal supports for all. That's a basic part of the student investment account. Okay, socio-emotional. These aren't as neat and tidy. And the reason for that is, so I'm gonna show you 7 recommendations and then strategies as well. Part of the thing that we needed to do with socio-emotional is wrestle with this idea of how are we gonna measure the effectiveness of this because we didn't have the identifiable targets. And so we knew we had to focus on 3rd grade reading, if that's a point of emphasis, because that was something from ODE on the academic side. So the socio-emotional team needed to first wrestle with what are some overall recommendations we could make and then some specific strategies. And we thought it was important to present both of them to you. So again, they said adding specialized staffing at high poverty schools, and you're going to start seeing a high relationship between the two teams on some of the things that were suggested. And fully developing MTSS in response to intervention. Response to intervention is specifically what we call our academic interventions related to an MTSS system. But again, we saw similarities between that and the academics. Something unique from the socio-emotional team was the need to develop a comprehensive socio and emotional health system. So to develop basically structures of supports for all types of families and all types of kids on their socio-emotional wellness and well-being across our system, and that it needs to be a comprehensive system. We talked a lot about equity and having equity-based practices related to socio-emotional health and what that looks like and how that looks like very specific targeted supports for some and some universal supports for all. We also had several different mental health providers, community-based mental health providers participating on this team, and it was the fifth recommendation was to increase partnerships with the rich resource that we have in our communities around mental health supports. Number 6 on the socio-emotional one and on the academic one was to look at class size and caseloads for targeted programs in schools. Again, that's a very similar idea, that targeting that for the schools that need the most support. And then number 7 was offering professional development, but they called out specifically trauma-informed practices and socio-emotional learning, particular to this area. Okay, and then here are the strategies. So the first strategy that was suggested that we spent a lot of time talking about in small group settings was to develop a small alternative high school. So that, and you'll see these strategies are much more specific than the overall recommendations. The second one was to expand our interim therapeutic care classrooms, or we refer to those sometimes as ITCC classrooms. They're currently at 2 of our elementary schools, Weddell and Richmond now, and that was one of the strategies that came out of this group. The third was to expand our behavior intervention system, or center, or BIC, which is a program that supports kids who are most at risk and have the most emergent behaviors in our district. Expand culturally specific family engagement nights was another strategy for number 4, and this was an attempt to try to think, how can we continually reach out to our families and bring them in doing culturally specific programming and culturally specific engagement? And that's a theme that you'll see throughout our application as well. Number 5 was expand culturally responsive professional development and curriculum. One of the interesting things for the socio-emotional team, culturally responsive includes being responsive to linguistic needs and kids that come from different ethnic and racial backgrounds, but also kids that display differently on the needs that they have, both socio-emotionally and for students who qualify for special education services. So it was a broad notion of how can we be more responsive to all the learners that we have. Number 6, and this is a theme in all 3, reduce caseloads for special education, for social workers. So that was a theme that was mentioned on a strategy, and remember for the academic and the recommendations from these. And then the 7th was develop a system to address racial and social justice. And that was something where there is a need. So we're not just dealing with individual cases that come up, but we are developing a system to be able to address them holistically. So, and that's a theme that we heard overall. This need for a systemic response is kind of a theme that we heard in all of our groups. All right, and now we're on to the real meal deal, which y'all came here to hear.
Okay, so you have copies of the entire application in your notebook, and you have the executive summary in your notebook. The executive summary is basically a synthesis of section 5 of the entire application, and that's where we're going to focus our attention. So you can choose to look directly in section 5, or you can choose to look at the executive summary, and the slides will complement that information as well. So you can choose to track in either document. As we moved into the application process, there are, as I said, that's section 5 is the actual plan. There are actually 9 sections to the total application, and so there are lots and lots of other questions and things that we were required to provide to ODE when we submit this in March. And I hope that you take the opportunity to thoroughly review all of those. We're not going to be going through all of those individual questions in this session tonight. But as we built the application, we started to try to group the expenditures into groupings that helped us tell a story and write the narrative as we were moving through. So these are the 11 categories, what we are trying now to call the 11 groups of strategies. And so they will focus on 5th grade reading, 9th grade on track, language acquisition, dual language, middle school math, mental and behavioral health, and community engagement. We talked you through those last week, but the additional expenditures fall into the categories of professional development, extracurricular activities, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and a continuum of supports. So the remainder of this presentation tonight is going to walk you through each of those 11 categories one by one with the summary of what activities are included and the financials that accompany that activity. So, remember, the total dollar figure coming in with the SIA funds is approximately $35 million. To give you an overview and a context for where that money is currently sitting in this application, in this first reading, there are about 21% of the total expenditures are on classified staff. That represents about 87 FTE. 49% of the total expenditures are on licensed staff, which is about 144 FTE. That represents about $17.2 million. 4% of the total expenditures is on administrative staff. That includes 9 administrators in different categories. And 26%, so just over a quarter of the total expenditures, is in stuff and things. So resources for professional development, be it contracts or extra duty pay or sub-release time, curricular materials and supplies that actually need to be put into classrooms, and fees or other costs associated with extracurricular activities. So that's the total breakdown. Just to give you another set of data that I don't have on a slide in front of you, but of those total hires, so there are 230 positions listed up there, 73% of those newly hired positions are school-based positions. So directly in schools, assigned to schools, working in schools. 27% of those 230 jobs are district positions, coaches, mentors. Some of those administrators would fall into district level positions. And you'll see those as we walk through, but I just wanted to give you some context for where those new positions will be assigned. That's not good. Okay. I don't know what I did.
Just have to make it up. So if you can turn in your books, each of the strategies we talk about, each of the 11 strategies will be broken down in the same area. So this is the first page of the executive summary, which produces kind of a little narrative summary of each strategy. And it's actually page 10 in the application. If you can hold both documents. And as Linda said, there's several different layers to the actual application. Are we good to go? Yep. Okay, so remember, as a district, we decided to focus on 5th grade reading instead of 3rd grade reading. The reason why 5th grade reading is an important metric for our district, which is somewhat unique, is that we have really rich language systems and language structures in our elementary schools. 23 of our schools offer Spanish as a language of instruction to our students. And so for a 3rd grade reading target, a chunk of our kids aren't actually taught in English, and the test is only in English for Smarter Balance. So we decided to extend that to 5th grade to be able to give us a couple more years to be able to make those linguistic connections between Spanish and English. So because ultimately, as a district, we believe that our kids bring with them a really rich linguistic resource that is unique to us. There are several things that are unique to our district, and this is one of the most important. And so kids come with a language already, and we want to make sure that we're capitalizing on that. And so you're going to see some examples of this, but focus on 5th grade reading is an example of that. So for all elementary schools across our system, We are planning to purchase intervention materials for struggling readers and continued teacher training on how to use those intervention materials. Remember, we talked a little bit about MTSS last week, and the idea with MTSS is everybody gets exposed to a core reading curriculum and core solid reading instruction. Some kids need more, and this is the more. And so we would provide that as a foundation across our school district. So it doesn't matter whether it's a kid at Cummings or Calapooya or Sweegle, they would have a set of research-based interventions. On top of that, we would like to target 8 elementary schools and really have a focus at those schools on literacy development, focusing specifically on K-1 literacy. To be able to make it happen, we'd like to offer these schools that they would have full-time instructional mentors and behavior specialists. Currently, some schools have half-time instructional mentors and half-time behavior specialists. And what that means is that the instructional mentor, a lot of times, who's supposed to be a side-by-side coach to be able to support teachers in their classroom, oftentimes gets called out to do other things. And so what we want to do is really maximize those instructional leaders who are already in our classrooms on a small basis to maximize their time. So that's the idea of offering full-time instructional mentors and behavior specialists. We also would like to increase the number of teachers who we can either co-teach or to reduce class sizes depending on the school where they're located, specifically in K-1. And we're focusing our time on the 90-minute reading block and the 90-minute reading instruction that goes on during that block. We're also going to offer district literacy coaches in both Spanish and English. And I just referred to the idea that our district is somewhat unique in that we have a lot of Spanish-speaking teachers and Spanish-speaking students who are learning to read in our classrooms as well. So we want to think about reading as a holistic development, not just in one language. And then we would hire a coordinator to be able to coordinate all of this literacy programming that's going on. And I apologize for the crowd. This is a tiny screen to see, so hopefully you can pull up these on your phones if you have them. So this lays out the actual numbers of positions assigned to this strategy. So notice that there are 8 FTE for instructional mentors and 8 for behavior specialists. They're currently funded at a 0.5 level, so that is 4 total FTE for $535,000 for behavior specialists and $535,000 for instructional mentors. We are proposing to introduce 25 licensed teachers at the schools that we talked about. They'll be funded at a full FTE, and that is $2.4 million, almost $2.5 million, $2.493. The 2 district coaches, remember that we are going to have one of them in Spanish and one of them in English, would be 2 full-time FTE for $279,000. The program coordinator is the administrator to oversee all of this, and that is $150,000. The reading interventions for struggling readers across our district will be $2 million as a purchase to be able to provide that as a foundation across. And then for these, and you're going to hear this as a theme, we're going to be hiring a lot of new people in the next few weeks, hopefully, next few months for sure. So we need to provide onboarding exercises for them and quality professional development for them. So we propose for the 25 new reading teachers that we're hiring as reading specialists, they also need training on the co-teaching model, on what that looks like and how they can do that well. So we would put $80,000 aside to be able to provide a language institute and a literacy institute this summer to be able to get those teachers up and moving and ready to make a difference right away. You'll see embedded in 1.7, and all the strategies are numbered, and then all the separate categories are numbered with a decimal. And 1.7 also includes 12 language coaches, and we'll talk about those specifically when we talk about language acquisition, but that training for them is folded into this budget. Is this one you?
All right, so continuing on, this is all just in order, so you can continue on your executive summary. We're still on page 1, or you'll need to flip the page to page 11 in the actual application. Strategy 2 is focusing on 9th grade on track. Remember, that is a reference to ensuring that students successfully complete 6 credits during their freshman year. And students who do successfully complete 6 credits are more likely to graduate in 4 years. Students that do not successfully complete 6 years require quite a bit of intervention and support to get them back on track and across the stage in 4 years. So this is a powerful metric nationally, but specifically a powerful metric for us here in the district as well. We have found, we referenced this last week, we have found that Algebra 1 is typically the most failed class for our freshmen and is more often than not the reason that a child ends up off track. So pushing in to target at 2 of our high schools that currently have the data that indicates they need some additional supports, not only in math, but in ensuring that their freshmen are on track. At 2 targeted high schools, we will push in additional licensed teachers to co-teach or reduce class size in Algebra 1. And each of those schools will also have a math coach assigned to provide support to those school-based math teams. That will occur at 2 of our 6 comprehensive high schools. In addition, we have included an MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support Coordinator, to oversee the high-quality classroom instruction, make sure that the teamings and the data collection is working, that teams that need support in database decision-making or selection of interventions or instructional strategies, whatever sorts of supports those teams need, could be provided by this coordinator. Here are the financials associated with that. You'll see in 2.1, licensed math teachers, we'll be pushing in 7 FTE into those 2 targeted high schools. Specifically, again, those 7 teachers are coming in to co-teach or to reduce class size in Algebra 1. In addition, there is a full-time 9th grade success team coach. That is not referenced on the prior page. I apologize for that. This is not an administrator, but a coach who actually would be present on site with MTSS teams as they're working through strategies, and again, can provide coaching specifically to the teachers participating in those teams. And then you'll also see the 1.0 FTE supervisory present for the MTSS coordinator.
And just a quick note, and I know you remember this, but remember specifically for the 9th grade on track teams, we also have high school success dollars as well, which is part of the overall Student Success Act. And so our schools have been working in those teams for the last 2 years or 3 years in some cases to be able to provide supports for students. And now that Measure 98 is fully funded, that's another source that will augment that work with us. So you might look at that and think, well, that's a really small investment in that. Holistically, it's a bigger investment than is represented just in this source because there's other sources of resources coming through the Student Success Act. Okay, language acquisition. So we've talked a little bit so far about having a targeted focus for our plan, and the same idea goes through with language acquisition. So this is on your community executive page 1. And then it's in your app on page 12. And so the narrative for each description is on page 12. So at 8 targeted schools, again, we're going to invest in full-time instructional mentors and behavior specialists with the exact same theory of action that I just explained, that this will free up people to be the coaches and do the coaching role that they were initially placed there to do. But in a 0.5 position, it's hard to do. We'll also add English language development teachers to provide co-teaching, coaching, and support. Most of that with our English language development model will be in small groups or in targeted groups of ELLs in the classroom settings. And then we're also going to create a district language acquisition coach in both Spanish and English. Again, really treating language as an asset that we have, and we want to build up the best instruction in both Spanish and English classrooms. For our middle schools and high schools with programs for students learning English, we're going to add ELD teachers to, again, support our co-teaching model or our sheltered instruction model. At our high schools in particular, a co-teaching model with our special education teachers and in our special education classrooms, we've learned a lot from that practice and those pilot practices on what works and what supports are needed for that, and we're hoping to replicate that with our language learners as well. It is a best practice that our teachers have led that work and our teachers have introduced that work, and we want to be able to honor that and then start replicating it across the district. And that idea, just as an aside, is what we hope to do with our Student Success Act dollars overall. We hope to learn from the schools where we're deeply investing and then slowly roll out for the rest of the district. And so co-teaching, particularly at the high school, is something we've learned a lot about. And then we'll add licensed teachers for co-teaching or sheltered instruction, particularly for our newcomer students. And this is something that we heard, those of you participating in the listening sessions again, we heard that we need a different model to address the needs of our newcomer students. So when somebody comes to our schools with very little English and they're a 7th or 8th grader, the path for them in our high schools needs to be different than it currently is. And so we are exploring a lot of different models on what that can look like and what best practice shows us around our newcomer kids. And there's a lot of need for that. And then finally, we are adding an administrator to oversee this, and the administrator will work closely with a program associate who will be providing support to all schools with language learners. Again, something unique in our district is that we have language learners in every single school in our district. Lots of districts have just little concentrated pockets here or there, but we have language learners across. We don't necessarily have native Spanish programs in every single school, but we do have language learners who we need to support them as learners. And again, we heard that from our teachers on our task force, that we need better supports across. And then we will hire district language acquisition trainers to use specific evidence-based language programs. And so we need to research what are the best programs that we can use and then train up on a set of programs. So that's what our language acquisition strategies will do. Again, this is on page 12 if you'd like to look at it in not such minute detail. So the first two lines here are our instructional mentors and behavior specialists. Again, 8 FTE, but they're 0.5, so a total of 4 for instructional mentors and 4 FTE for behavior specialists for $535 each. We will hire a language elementary ELD PA and 2 language acquisition trainers. So that's a total of 3 licensed staff who will be highly skilled staff to work side teacher teams and building teams and to be able to support all of our learners. So that's $419,000. We have 2 elementary biliteracy trainers, and these are specific people who will help us work in our Spanish speaking classrooms to be able to talk about what's called translinguistic instruction. And so that's the idea that once a student learns to read in one language, you can transfer those skills to another language, but that transfer doesn't just happen magically, it happens with some specific evidence-based practices. So we want to focus in on that window of time to be able to honor the language that our kids bring, and then to be able to use that to be able to learn English as well. We are offering ELD coaches, and they're called coaches here, but they are licensed teachers who will go in, provide coaching, but also provide team teaching and team support at the building level, and that is 8 teachers for $1.1 million. Our redesign of our high school and middle school newcomer programs, we have 4 positions set aside for that redesign. And then our redesign of our middle school ELD program, we are offering 12 FTE at 0.5 for a total of 6 across our middle schools, and that will cost us about $828,000. And finally, an administrator to help coordinate all of this work again will be hired, and that administrator will cost us about $150,000. I think I'm doing dual as well. So dual language. One of the things we heard from our families is the need to increase the number of students who have access to quality dual language instruction and quality dual language programs. So this slide represents two different phases of that. The first level of district trainers are to work with our current dual language programs and dual language classrooms and schools to be able to ensure that we have excellent instruction going on for our students right away. So what training and supports are unique to dual? I was a dual principal and I worked in a couple different dual language schools, and you need some unique training because it is different in a dual language classroom than it is in other classrooms. So we wanted to provide trainers in both the elementary and the secondary levels to be able to provide quality PD for those teachers. And then we also wanted a coordinator, and this coordinator will serve as a person to start facilitating our planning process as a district to expand dual language. So one of the things we'd like to do is expand the number of schools that offer dual language programs, and this coordinator will start the planning process for that and then oversee the development as we continue to offer more and more dual. And something to remember, this is an ongoing, our student investment account is an ongoing source of resources for us. So for this year, we would like to hire the 2 program associates to be coaches for $279,000, and then 1 person to be the coordinator of overseeing, laying the groundwork for the expansion of our dual program for $150,000. I would anticipate that we will come back to you at a different point and say, we've laid the groundwork and this is our vision for moving forward, and it could be a point of attention moving forward with the student investment account. But this is what we'd suggest for next year.
Okay. I will walk you through the next 2. So strategy number 5, focusing on middle school math. All middle schools will now have increased instructional time for math due to a schedule change to a 6-period day. The middle school bell schedule is a proposal that, if approved, could be included in this funding, and we believe that moving to a 6-period day on a trimester schedule will provide the additional minutes in math and language arts instruction to give teachers enough time to fully cover the material and to provide interventions for students. In addition, all middle schools will receive access and materials for the curriculum-based assessments and student supports in order to make sure we can meet the individualized needs of kids in math. And as a reminder, we came back to middle school math as a target because our data indicates that our students who are not successful grade-wise, so kids that don't pass a class in middle school math, grades 6, 7, or 8, that their percentages of walking across the stage in graduation in 4 years drops. So this is another place where we are trying to fill that gap so that we can get kids on track and keep them on track towards graduation as the ultimate goal. So all middle schools will receive access to those first 2 bullets. Pilot middle schools, a handful of middle schools, we're not sure how many, we're not sure which schools, but pilot middle schools will have access to new math curriculum and the associated professional development for implementing that new math curriculum. And finally, we have 2 middle schools that will be targeted, and the resources that those 2 middle schools would receive would include additional licensed math teachers, again, to come in and co-teach or reduce class size in middle school math, and a coach, a full-time coach assigned to each of those 2 targeted middle schools to provide training, model teaching, embedded coaching in those classrooms. The financials of that lay out like this. 5.1, the bell schedule adjustment has a cost in people resources associated with it, and that is 16 FTE pushed into our middle schools, not tied to specific content areas, not tied to specific schools yet, but those decisions for that 16 FTE will be pushed out based upon master schedules. So In order to maintain class size and keep our class sizes stable at the middle school level, we cannot move to a 6-period trimester day without pushing in additional resources. And that's calculated out at just about 16 FTE. So we have included that here in the SIA application. In addition, for the targeted schools, I talked about additional teachers and coaches. 5.3 actually is the FTE associated with the licensed math teachers. That's a total of 4 FTE that would be pushed into those 2 targeted schools. And the mentor is a total of 2 FTE, so 1 full-time coach at each targeted middle school for math. 5.4 shows that there are additional earnings offered to pay staff to participate in professional development. You'll see there's 1.1 million set aside there for middle school math curriculum. And 5.6 lives here because it is connected to a middle school, but we're actually going to talk about the need for this assistant principal in one of the other topics. So you'll see there's a note that says move to SEL, social emotional learning strategy. We're targeting an additional middle school principal at 1 middle school, and we'll talk you through a variety of resources that we believe pushing into a middle school in a brand new pilot program and the expected outcomes that we hope to see from that. And so this middle school assistant principal FTE is actually connected to that. Okay, so we have made it through most of the targeted academic work and are transitioning now into strategy 6, which is a big one. So socio-emotional health, we've divided these slides up to give you some targeted information in clusters again. So page 15 of the application or page 2 of the executive summary, strategy number 6. So all schools across the district will receive access to socio-emotional learning curriculum, research-based materials that will help staff teach students the social emotional competencies and the manner in which to regulate their own behavior, to demonstrate grit. There's a whole gamut nationally recognized social emotional competencies, and we want to provide resources to our staff to help our students with those. Also, all schools will have access to PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports. Additional coaching and modeling supports will be accessible. Those will be district positions that are accessible to all schools. Similarly, a classroom management system for coaching and training, we have called out Envoy. Envoy stands for Educational Nonverbal Yardsticks. The O is just a placeholder. But it is a nonverbal set of classroom-based strategies, and we have seen tremendous success in our classrooms where teachers have utilized and implemented thorough Envoy strategies. So there is a significant increase in the number of Envoy coaches that we will have available to send out to schools to partner with and train up teachers. We heard significant requests for additional social workers and school psychologists. Those are included in Strategy 6. I'll walk you through the financials of those. In addition, Craig referenced the fact that we have had some mental health partners, some agencies, local agencies, in having conversations with us. Many of those are already in partnership with us, serving students in therapy in our schools. The barrier to the mental health partnerships that we currently have in place is that almost all of those providers are only able to work with students who qualify for OHP. So what this is looking at is trying to find a way where the district can provide pass-through dollars directly to those agencies in order to free up those therapy providers to work with any student, regardless of their insurance. And we'll get into some more details of that, and you'll see the financials on that as well. We'd like to add 1 district clerical staff member to manage the Panorama data collection and dashboard system. We currently have one of our school psychologists managing that entire system, and there is much more work that our school psychologist could be doing to work to the top end of his license. And so to provide a clerical staff member to take on the duties for managing the data collection of Panorama is a much more efficient use of resources. And finally, a coordinator of social emotional learning, really looking at how are we going to embed new curriculum, new staff. You'll see when we get to the financials and a significant increase in the number of staff coming under the umbrella of socio-emotional health. That's slide 1. Here's slide 2. We tried to continue to group additional expenditures by level to show you how things play out. Remember, the first slide was things that all schools could access. These are now broken up. Elementary schools, we would like to implement an additional trainer for social-emotional learning curriculum. At the middle school level, we need to increase the number of licensed school counselors and behavior cadre that are at targeted middle schools. And at our middle schools, we have 11 middle schools where we would like to add zones of regulation spaces. So giving students a quiet, calm place where they can regulate their behavior, where they can get themselves back in control, reorient themselves for learning, and return to the classroom. So this would be staffed by a highly trained classified member, and that space would be specifically targeting students with anxiety, trauma, or any other sorts of urgent needs. At the high school level, again, as I referred to a school psychologist who is currently working on panorama data, we have high school counselors that are also working on clerical sorts of tasks, and we want our counselors, again, to be working to the highest degree of their license. So we want our counselors counseling. And there are many, many clerical tasks in a high school counseling office that an additional classified staff person could take care of. So shifting that to a more efficient model where we have classified support staff to really allow our counselors at the high school to focus their time and efforts on counseling. Similar to the zones of regulation space at the middle school, we would be looking at some sort of safe space, some sort of area, opportunity for students to self-select in or to be referred into a place where they can regulate their behavior with a highly trained staff member to support them in regulating themselves back to learn and to get back to their classrooms. There would be staffing needs for 7 of those spaces. That is, each of our comprehensive high schools would open a safe space, and we'd like to offer that to our alternative education site as well. And finally, at the high school, we have included dollars for an increased contract to get more access for students to drug and alcohol counselors. That's listed under the high school level, and that is the primary target audience, but you do need to recognize that we have middle schoolers that also need and have afforded themselves of access to our drug and alcohol counselors. So we're hoping to extend and expand the contract with the agency who provides that for us. Finally, I showed you the middle school assistant principal, and that was actually under middle school math, but let me talk you through where that fits in a broader context. This is a brand new pilot opportunity. This has not been done or replicated across this district to this extent. We really are looking at identifying one middle school who will provide a thorough, complete, well-implemented pilot model of a trauma-informed restorative practices school. How are we using culturally responsive practices? How are we using high quality instruction and emotional supports in the classroom, out of the classroom, across the entire school setting? In order to really do that well, we believe there are an intense level of supports required in one school to really get this off the ground. So this one school, we would be looking at adding the assistant principal that I mentioned earlier, a classroom management envoy coach, specifically targeting nonverbal strategies used in the regular classroom, an additional counselor on site full-time, an additional CSOC, that stands for Community School Outreach Coordinator. Our CSOCs are typically our #1 liaisons between families and school staff. How can families figure out how to access their specific needs and get the things that they need from the school? The CSOC is the great connector between families and schools. So we would put an additional CSOC on that site, an additional community resource specialist. I always frame that for you and remind you that that's what we call Dwight and Kenny. We've talked to you about Dwight and Kenny and their successes. That really is a position that targets individual students and families. How can I ensure that you are at school every day? How can I ensure that you are best prepared to learn? How can I ensure that your transportation needs are met? How can I help you advocate with a classroom teacher? A community resource specialist is an advocate, a student advocate that comes alongside a kid and a family and says, I will walk this journey with you. And we believe that at this pilot school, we want that level of support available to our middle schools. So we will target a community resource specialist, and we also believe it's important to put a licensed clinical social worker in that school. So all of those resources in this pilot, kind of innovative way to try to see if we can make some movement in social emotional health, all of those would be targeted at one middle school. So here are the dollars and cents of all of those strategies that we went through on those 3 slides. You'll see just over $200,000 set aside for curriculum. The secretarial classified staff to help manage the panorama data in order to free up a school psychologist and not having to do that anymore. That's 1.0 classified staff. You'll see there's a total of 2 FTE needed in middle school counselors. That's actually 4 positions at 0.5 each. The classified staff, secretarial or clerical support staff to support our high school counselors and get them back working to the height of their license is a total of 6 FTE. We need some professional development for our counselors. There's a licensed teacher that would serve in a coaching role there. We need to beef up behavior cadre at our middle school Title I schools. That's a total of 3 additional FTE. We're now on 6.7. We'd like to beef up the access for PBIS for coaching and embedded professional development. That's an additional 3.0 FTE. The Envoy implementation, 6.8. You'll see that there's a total of 8 FTE there. We believe that that 8 is actually divided into 6 and 2. 6 of those Envoy coaches would be available to the broad district classroom teachers that are interested in pursuing that nonverbal classroom management and getting some training in that. But 2 of those Envoy coaches would be targeting specifically teachers in year 1 and year 2. So our youngest teachers, our newest teachers coming into classrooms, to give them that leg up on getting classroom management strategies set and established in their classrooms their first 2 years. And finally, you'll see dollars set aside there for just to cover the costs of some of the Envoy training. Moving on, you'll see social workers. That's an additional 8 FTE of new social workers we want to add. 11 FTE classified staff, similar to a behavior cadre member who would be in our middle schools, supervising and running our zones of regulation spaces. 6.12, an additional 4 full-time school psychologists. You'll see the next 2 are additional contract dollars. We believe we need to increase the current drug and alcohol contract by an additional $200,000. We have funds set aside for that in other areas of the budget, and this would be in addition to those funds. Similarly, I referred to the mental health partnerships and the need for pass-through dollars so that those mental health therapists can provide services to students who do not qualify for OHP. That currently has a dollar figure of $600,000 sitting there. We referred to the elementary SEL trainer. That's 1 full-time classified staff. The safe space supervision at the high schools, again, similar to that zones of regulation at the middle school, 7 FTE for that, and a coordinator to help us manage all of these new positions. Okay, is this you? Okay.
Okay, thanks for hanging in there. We have 5 more. No, 4 more. 4 more. 4 more. We're on 7. That was my math teacher right there coming out. So 4 more strategies to discuss and talk about. One of the things we heard a lot from our community is that they seek to have a deeper partnership with us that involves not just communication where we are telling the community what's going on, but deep 2-way communication with partners, with parents and families to ensure authentic involvement in decision making. So we need to devote part of these resources to making sure that that happens. So we want to expand our culturally specific district-wide systems to ensure authentic engagement and involvement with all of our students and families. And we heard from families time and time again about barriers to engagement that we need to start overcoming as a system. So to be able to do that, Linda spoke a little bit about our community and cultural resource specialists already, targeting specific communities. There is culturally responsive, which is the notion that we want to be inclusive for all. And then there's also culturally specific programming that we need to do. And that's another thing we learned, is that to be able to get the voice of specific groups, we need to program specifically for them and be able to create opportunities for that. So our community and cultural resource specialists will help us do that. One of the targeted outcomes we heard from doing our empathy interviews with students and families experiencing homelessness is that they need more supports. We've talked a lot in the boardroom about our number of homeless students are increasing year after year. So the McKinney-Vento, we've previously called these STEP advocates, and McKinney-Vento is the federal regulation around supporting homeless students. And so we would hire more McKinney-Vento advocates to support our families and our students. We would hire community school outreach specialists, or CSOCs, as a foundation across at all Title I schools. Currently, CSOCs are funded in a variety of sources and in a variety of ways, and money is kind of oftentimes pinched together to be able to offer a CSOC, and it hasn't been consistent funding source. So at all of our title schools, we'd like to offer a foundational funding source for CSOCs, again, because we've learned, and time again in the community listening sessions, and those of you who have participated in this can attest to this, people would mention specific names of their members who were welcoming them at schools, and oftentimes it's our CSOCs, where it was time and time an affirmation of the work that they're doing in our community. So you're going to see that in our budget once we get there. Increased translation and interpretation services is another thing that we heard from our families, and we need to increase the quality and the languages offered. So we heard both of those things as super important to our communities. Having a public engagement specialist who is different than a communication specialist. An engagement specialist is about two-way communication, not just did you receive what we sent you. Having a coordinator for strategic partnerships and engagement, and this is a position which would be new to our school district, so it's someone to seek out community-based organizations and bring them in and be able to help us get better with them around the table. And then also increased translation equipment. That, again, some equipment is school-based, some equipment is district-based, and there's a lack of overall, just the number of headsets that you see people using. So we need to buy more of them. So here are the numbers associated with all of these actions. Our community resource specialists targeting specifically African American, Pacific Islander. Our student services, when we did our listening sessions with families who have students who qualify for student services, we heard from them that they need a community resource person that reaches out to them to help them navigate the school system as well. So we are going to hire 2 of those. And then for our Latina and Latino and Latinx, we would hire 2 community resource specialists devoted specifically for that population as well. The cultural resource specialist in line 7.2 is a slightly different role than the community resource specialist, and this would be targeted specifically for our Native American students and students who qualify for services through our Indian education program. And you'll remember that was one of the subgroups that we targeted for these funds. Our McKinney-Vento advocates, we would suggest hiring 2 who are focused specifically on students and families experiencing homelessness, and then 1 focused specifically on our families that are impacted through the foster care system. One thing that we heard time and time again for our students who are in the foster care system is they move more than some of our other students, and having somebody to help them navigate that is essential, and it's something we don't currently have as a focal point. So we would increase our advocates by 3. This is the big expenditure at 7.4. So we would offer K-12 CSOCs at all of our title schools for a foundation of 6 hours at each of the title schools, and that would be 30 new FTE. Some of our schools will choose to extend their hours and have their CSOCs work 8. Some of our schools will probably hire 2 CSOCs because they're bigger schools with different populations that they want to serve. And we will, of course, will still encourage that, but this provides a foundation. So no longer will it be this school happens to have the funds this year. We'll provide a foundation for our title schools, for our CSOCs. We're also increasing our translation services, and that's both people and equipment. And so for on the people side, that we're increasing them by 6 translators. We need to up our senior secretary who coordinates all of that, getting our translators out into the field. So we're increasing that to 1 FTE. And then our public engagement specialist, which is the person who will be going out, engaging our communities and working with them in a continual feedback loop. And then finally, our strategic partnership and engagement coordinator. And this is an administrator who will start to nurture community-based organizations so we can use those contacts and bring them into our system. Is this one me or you? Okay. So professional development. This one's going to look small. So I'm just preparing you for that. But our professional development, you probably saw it embedded in almost every single strategy that we have. So this person is just called out because it was the #1 universal priority that came out of our task force. And so we need to provide a coordinated response to professional development, and that's what this person would do. So we believe that our teachers are the key to success in our classrooms, and building up the knowledge, will, and skill of our teachers is what we hope to do through all of our professional development systems. And we talked a little bit before about it needed to be ongoing and embedded and related to the teachers themselves. So we need a coordinator to help design and implement that across the district. So this is just one position, but again, this doesn't represent all the professional development that we're engaging in. It's just someone to coordinate those efforts, so they're done in a concentrated fashion.
All right, I will do the next 2, and then Craig will wrap up with strategy number 11. We are almost there, my friends. All right, so we heard loud and clear from our families across the broad spectrum of different kinds of community engagement that they want their students to have access to different and more robust kinds of things after school, engaging things to keep their kids involved and to provide them a sense of community. So we are looking at offering elementary after-school programs, offering middle school after-school programs, and expanding summer school programs, specifically targeting our students who qualify for Indian education. They have a summer school program that is well attended. It has been reduced due to lack of funding in previous years, and we are going to not only get them back up to what they currently were receiving in summer school, but actually extend it and to provide them some additional opportunities. We also heard that fees and costs for high school athletics is at times a barrier for students to be able to participate, even with reduced fee opportunities. So we believe it is now time to blow up access to our high school athletics and activities and ensure that kids who want to participate are able to do so. So we have put significant dollars in here in order to reduce the fees required to participate in those kinds of things. In addition, we know that our music and drama, our music and theater programs need additional resources, and so we have put additional funds in here which could be allocated out to schools and identified for different purposes. Some schools have instruments that are 30 plus years old and they need a regular instrument recycle schedule. Some schools have uniforms or choir robes or dance outfits, all sorts of things that just have not been replaced recently and need to be upgraded. And so this fund will provide probably what will look like grants out to individual schools. We won't be able to meet everyone's needs in year 1, but utilizing this as a recurring dollar figure to be able to push some funds back into our music and theater programs. So dollars associated with this. We're targeting contracted services for our elementary after-school programs, so identifying community-based organizations that we can partner with to come in after school for our elementary schools and provide clubs, activities, tutoring, all sorts of different opportunities. So we've put just shy of $1 million, $900,000 there to target elementary after school. Middle school would be a combination of our own staff and contracted services. Those details haven't been worked out yet, but that's $1.35 million sitting here. The Indian Education Summer School Extension will cost us about $35,000. And then you'll see those last two ticket items, the reduction of high school activities and athletics fees. We've put $750,000 in there as a placeholder. Just for a frame of reference, annually we bring in just under $600,000 in pay-to-play fees. So we want to ensure that we can greatly reduce fees for kids and expand access to have more kids participate. So we've started with that 750 number. And then $400 to seed a pot of money to support music and theater.
That's 400,000.
What did I say?
400.
Oh, not $400, 400,000, yes. That is different. Sorry, we're getting a little loopy up here. Okay, strategy 10. We are committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion in order to provide safe and welcoming environments for our students and to ensure that our teachers provide instruction and support to our kids in a manner that is respectful and honoring to their culture and their belief systems. So, professional development opportunities, specifically targeting culturally responsive teaching, restorative discipline practices, and social justice. But in addition to just PD, we need to ensure that we have curriculum materials in front of our kids that represent them, that are culturally appropriate in their content. And so it's time to change out some materials and to provide some additional supplemental resources to classroom teachers so that our students begin to see them in the texts that they engage with or the work that they're doing in their classrooms. Our special education classrooms, when a teacher comes to us as a young teacher in year 1 or 2 of their career, we have a very limited amount of staff who are able to provide mentoring services to them. We've included additional mentors so that all of our teachers in our special education classrooms in years 1 and 2 of their service here in the district get robust mentoring supports. And finally, we're hiring a lot of people. And the reality is that that's going to require some additional staff in human resources simply to get those positions processed and, more importantly, to help us to continue and pursue recruiting and or retention efforts for diverse employees. So the financials associated with that, there are 2 secretarial positions in human resources, 2 classified positions that are represented there on 10.1. I referenced the additional mentors for our special education teachers. We are suggesting that we increase that FTE by 3. We currently have 2 SPED mentors. This would give us a total cadre of 5 to mentor our new special education teachers. And then again, you'll see dollar figures, pots of money, $400,000 to go towards professional development for equity, social justice, and restorative practices, an additional $500,000 for those curriculum updates that are necessary. Okay. Last one.
Okay, you're gonna miss the best part. All right. Here we are, strategy 11. Okay. So strategy 11, and this one is named the continuum of supports. So we heard from our families, particularly our families who have students who are in special education, and from some of our students who will receive our special education services, that we need to do a better job of providing a continuum of supports for students and meeting them where they are and what they need. So we want to be able to be more flexible to respond to the needs. So we'd like to add teachers to reduce special education caseloads. In some of our targeted sites, our caseloads are too high for teachers to be able to really have the relationships that they want to have with some of our most at-risk students, which are students who qualify for special education services. So we'd like to provide targeted supports for that. Goalbook is a software program that helps teachers develop IEPs, and remember, an IEP is an individualized education plan. When you have big caseloads and you have a lot of kids that you're seeing, it's hard to make them truly individualized plan that further the needs of that kid. So Goldbook is something that we've tried out for the last couple of years, and we'd like to extend it across our system as a source of support for all of our special education teachers. We'd like to add 2 additional ITCC classrooms at the elementary level, and we spoke a little bit about what those look like. We'd like to add 1 BIC program and 2 additional licensed teachers, as well as classified staff and a social worker who's devoted specifically to our students that are in the BIC program. And remember, we have 42,000 students. Our BIC program serves about 15 or 16 of them. So these are our most at-risk students and providing them extra supports. And a family is in crisis as well for a social worker to be able to provide that extra support. So that's why it's targeted at that position. And then hiring another coordinator in student services to help us oversee all of these new programming is a theme that you've heard throughout. So here are our suggestions and the dollars. For our SPED teachers, we'd hire 10 new SPED teachers for about $1 million. We'd hire a SPED coordinator to work side by side with them, so again, it's about $150,000. Offering Goldbook, which is an extension of the software that we spoke about, is $200,000. We'd like to increase our overall number of ITCC classrooms to 4 classrooms total. And so that would be 4 licensed teachers. With those licensed teachers there are 2 highly trained classified staff that work in those classrooms as well. So that would be an additional 8 staff overall, so 2 for each classroom when there are 4. The BIC program, so the teachers, the licensed staff for BIC would be 2 teachers. And then we need to hire a social worker as well to do that work, specifically tying families with resources to be able to support them. So again, just as a snapshot, we presented this at the start, but this is, we've talked, it's really hard to keep track of all of these positions that we're talking about. So this just gives you a breakdown of the percents of each total. So remember, 21% of our overall staffing was devoted to classified, 49% devoted to licensed staff, a little bit under 4%, it's like 3.8% for our admin staff, and then 26% goes into our professional development, the curriculum we mentioned, the extracurricular activities and things like that. This is just a snapshot and just to give you kind of a holistic view of the overall resources by the strategy. So it breaks it down from strategy from 1 to 11. And shows you the percentage devoted to each strategy. So if you look at number 6, it says socio-emotional health, and that accounts for 20% of our overall expenditures. But I think it's important to remember that adding 25 licensed teachers at the elementary level is going to impact socio-emotional health. And for our task force, we tried really hard at one of our meetings to divide our priorities into either socio-emotional health or academic, and almost in every single case, it was both. Because our teachers are our #1 providers of socio-emotional supports. Our teachers in our classrooms are the ones who are loving up the kids that come to them every single day, and our teachers are the ones that have the capacity to do it. So when we look at socio-emotional health as a called out area, we can't forget that adding our teachers to the system is a socio-emotional support. And it's an important key socio-emotional support that we can never forget. So this is just a snapshot. I won't go through each percentage. So this is the last slide. So we are really close. Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Myers. I appreciate the support. One thing that ODE has asked us to do, which is a little bit unique, but I really like it with the student investment account, is to be able to identify a plan A, which is what we just presented to you, and a plan B and C, which are kind of contingency plans for if you don't spend all the resources. They right now are saying they're going to be really tight in no rollover for the resources, which means it is, and we're not the only district in this boat, but it is hard to get everything up and running in 1 year to be able to do this well. And we all know the key isn't just hiring more teachers. The key is hiring more excellent teachers, just like we already have in our classrooms now. So we're not going to advance anything if we just go out and hire willy-nilly without really strong supports of who we are at Salem-Keizer and recruit people who reinforce that. So Plan B and C is just a list of activities that we could fund if we're not able to fully fund Plan A. So they're relatively broad. We don't have to break out expenditure categories on each of them. I would prefer to not go through every single one unless you want me to call out specific examples of what it could look like. One thing that we did here that I do want to call out, the alternative education redesign, you heard that as the #1 strategy in the socio-emotional, if you remember back an hour and 10 minutes ago. And that is something, that redesign is in process right now. And so we wanted to set aside some dollars in Plan B because, again, if it's not this year funding, I'm thinking you're going to hear this next year as something we need to devote funds to because we're laying the groundwork for it now. Additional classroom capacity is another one that we would like to increase. We can talk about that a little bit more. Innovation grants was something that came up in our community to be able to set aside a pocket of money for innovative practices that are happening at the school level that people at the school level could apply for. I personally love that idea because it's capitalizing on, we have hundreds of innovative practices going on across our system and excellent ways of reaching our kids, and this would be a way to capitalize those, shine some light on those, and then accelerate them across our system. So that's a prioritized strategy. And then you can just see increasing middle school electives. Overall, we put in here expansion of Plan A strategies. And what that would look like is instead of having 1 trauma-informed middle school, we would have 2. So, or instead of having 4 ITCC classrooms, we could have 6. Or instead of offering after-school programs at 8, we would offer it at 16. So to be able to take what we have here and significantly accelerate it. Of course, I'm sure you're thinking this. In the back of your mind, you're probably thinking, if we couldn't hire the right people to do this, then how are we going to do that? And we understand that. But there could be targeted programs that are easier to recruit staff and hire for than others. And so that's just an acknowledgement of that. Increasing art education across on piloting that at specific schools and increasing access to equipment and materials as well. We heard a lot about recess, particularly from our elementary parents. The pros and cons, and those teachers in here who do recess duty probably have a lot they can tell. It was one of the highlights of my day when I was a principal to play Foursquare. But we heard a lot about the need to be able to have better recess supports across our system, and so we put that in here as a targeted school. One of the promising practices that is on here that I want to call attention to, then I'll be done, is a parent academy. So the idea of having a centralized parent academy for parents, because we heard a lot from parents that they want access to mental health supports. They want access and information on how to navigate our math curriculum. They want access on how to read our report cards. So it's not just our students and staff that a parent academy would focus on. It would be able to provide that type of training and support for our parent community as well, and use them as partners and to be able to offer resources as well that our parent community could help train our teachers and administrators and staff on best practices on how to serve their needs as well. So it's an innovative practice that some school districts across the nation have proposed that I think has some exciting practice that we would put in our Plan B and C.
Wow, that was amazing. I can't imagine the amount of work that went into that.
Just an hour or 2.
Yeah, just an hour or 2. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break before we continue on.
Nice job.
time to start back up, everybody.
Jack, those prices you had on there, you know.
I know you're all having fun.
About double my prices I charge you. Last year was two.
I do too. Can I get in line? I got something to say too.
See, that's what's nice. That's what they do. Like, I'm staying for myself. I'm about not to. I really debated dropping out of college.
Well, I never.
Well, it's not the rigorous of the actual act. It's real. I understand the script. So it's just
We're going.
the fact that I should
It's all good. You're getting lots of questions answered. It's all good. Thanks.
Okay, I think we're ready to start back up. Hello. Thank you. So at this time, we'll have questions from the Budget Committee as well as board directors. And we're going to start with Budget Committee, but we're going to kind of do a loop, get one question, and we'll go around again. So if you have a second question, you can ask it then. So that way, everybody gets an opportunity to speak. So let's start with the Budget Committee. Is there any questions from anybody on the Budget Committee? Levy?
Yeah, one question for clarification about activity 6.14, mental health community partnerships contract. So that is to make sure that students who are not eligible for OHP can also access the mental health counseling. So we're talking about kids that are over the poverty line, right?
Some of them, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else on the Budget Committee have a question?
Yeah. I'm just going to add to your answer on that. I think that we also, some of our kids on OHP run out of numbers of visits as well. And so it's both. And then we have some kids right on the edge of the poverty line that don't quite meet the OHP requirements.
Satya, we'll start with you. One question.
Yeah, I really liked the presentation, and it touched upon quite a lot of very important areas. The way I see it is, this is just laying the foundation. It's like cutting the ground. It's probably going to take 5 to 10 years, at least 5 years before we can start hardwiring and seeing some of these things take root in a way that we can scale it up. How are we going to, so something to think about is when we are discussing in the budget, in the regular budget committee and the budget, how do we kind of piggyback these two concepts so that we don't simply duplicate programs that don't cancel each other? And how can we start thinking in terms of lean systems that will allow us to streamline in this framework that you suggested?
So I'll just go ahead and answer that. All along in the student investment account work, we've been looking at what is it that we do in the general fund, what should we do in SIA versus the general fund, but you saw expansion of some things in order to scale them, but we were really cautious about that. And in places where we hadn't had enough resources. So an example would be halftime behavior specialist at our targeted schools. We've known that wasn't enough of an investment, but it is a good strategy. So we've used the SIA to complement. So both budgeting processes are going on parallel tracks, even though you haven't been presented the Gen Fund budget yet.
All right, thank you.
Sharon?
Thank you. So when I read it over the weekend, I had lots of questions, but you literally answered almost all of them. But the one that kept coming back up, we talk about targeted schools, we talk about 8 schools, 4 schools, 2 elementary schools. How do you go about then selecting those schools? Is it based on data? Is it based on, obviously it's based on need, but I guess the question is, have you identified those schools, or how will you go about selecting those schools? And then, comma, how would you, comma, it's one sentence, it's one sentence, comma, how will you measure success then in such a short time frame, in a year?
So, yes, you hit the nail on the head, and that the first sort of line of demarcation for identifying which schools need which kinds of services will be data, and specifically looking at data that has been persistent over time. So, are there places where we need to flush in additional resources to really get a move on a school that, for whatever reason, is not yet making the kind of growth that we want them to make? So, at this point, we don't know. We could probably make a guess at which are our 8 lowest performing schools in reading, but I think we also need to measure that we also have 8 schools that would be receiving support in language acquisition. And so for a total of 16 schools, we have the flexibility to move back and forth and identify which sort of resource might meet the greatest need in that school. I think there are lots of things we would need to consider in finalizing those decisions. And obviously at this point, we haven't even, this is the first time anyone's seen it, so we haven't laid out any conversations with administrators, how ready is the staff for, a change culture. Some of these would involve some pretty significant changes. So there are lots of pieces that need to fall into place before we make those decisions, but the initial sort of draft of who do we need to reach out to will be based on data.
And then your second question was about the performance.
It wasn't one question.
Okay.
The comment.
Your second clause was about performances. Yes, so, and this is something that ODE has acknowledged. So our target is 5th grade reading that we talked about. We're targeting our resources, particularly our reading schools at K1. So we are hoping across the board that a focus on literacy increases reading across the school, but we probably won't see strong gains for several years in that. And so the way that we'll set our performance targets when we come back to you with those targets, some of them will kind of be like that. So a curve up, same thing for a freshman on track, impacting our high school graduation rates. There is a little bit of a lag between those. That said, we're constantly monitoring our students' growth over time in a lot of different ways, other than just the ones that we'll report to at the state, and we'll be monitoring growth with those as well.
Kathy?
Well, I was just overwhelmed by the breadth of this program, and I've been following it all along, and I read mine too, and I made my little list. But this is really such a substantial change for Salem that I have put together some new questions. There were things I hadn't even thought of that you covered. It really is going to be substantial to our numbers and to our children and to our teaching staff as well.
So no question?
No, that's all I got to say right now.
Okay,
I'll have
thank
plenty later.
Okay. You've been warned. Jesse?
Well, I have one. Give me a second. Okay, I have a couple. So, but here's
No
I'm
commas.
doing one. Yeah,
No commas.
I'll have like one semicolon. It's improperly used, but it's still there. So my main one is going to be about class size. So clearly there's concerns about class sizes, and so this one's going to be. So what are we doing in this to address this, or in regards to the student-teacher ratio, any either of those? And then semicolon, why are we doing what we're doing why are we doing this instead of fully focusing on the numbers of class size? Does that make sense?
Just for the record, it was Jesse's idea to do one question per. So I think he's taking advantage with that semicolon, just saying.
A little bit. It's corruption.
So I'll
Corruption at its
tackle,
finest.
I think maybe what was the second portion of the question first, which is why aren't we using the money to spread across all schools for a broader reduction in class size? So number one, I want to remind you that the guidance that comes from the legislation actually requires us to look at this through equity-based funding. And so if you go back and review the plan, there actually is very little in the plan that is applied universally and accessible to all. There are things that are universally applied perhaps at a level, so all of our middle schoolers might be able to access this, or all of our elementary schools. But to find something that just says, we're going to make this broad stroke really isn't within the intent of the legislation, and it really is requiring us to target who are the underrepresented students that have not yet been successful in our system, and how are we going to change to respond to that. So that's a portion of my answer. I do think there is also just a logistical reality to reducing class size. Craig and his team did some quick research for us at the elementary level, and you want to talk through it, or?
Sure, I can talk through it.
We can tag
So,
team it.
There's a couple different things with class size, and we know that class size does matter. And class size matters both in academics and the way that the classes feel for the kids who are in them. The research related specifically to academics is that class size matters most when you can get class sizes down to about 1 to 15 or 1 to 16, particularly targeting K2, K3. So we, instead of going down that low, because that would be a really big departure of what we have now for class sizes, we decided to run a scenario at 8 of our elementary schools, just reducing K2 class sizes from where they're currently at about 1 to 25 or 1 to 26, depending on the schools that we randomly targeted, down to 1 to 20, which is still above the average, the suggested average, but it would seem like a workable number for us. So to be able to do that at those 8 schools, we would need to build or have access to 17 new classrooms for those 8 schools only, for K2 only at those schools. So then we did an audit of those schools to see how many classrooms do we have. As we all know, and when you've been in schools, classrooms are used for a lot of different purposes. And some of the innovative practices that we've seen here today are being used in classroom spaces. But the available classrooms that we had at those 8 schools, there were 4 classrooms available. So a real constraining factor to be able to whole cloth target a class size reduction that would even get us down to 1 to 20 would be about a new elementary school. Our new elementary schools are around 17 to 20 classrooms. So to just ensure that that wasn't just at those buildings, we decided to extend it to 6 more buildings to be able to get a better representative sample. And what we found with the same 1 to 20 ratio at those 14 buildings, we would need 32 new classrooms, which is about a school and a half. We don't have that space currently in our system, that we don't have 32 empty classrooms at 14 schools, targeting only K2. So that's the biggest constraining factor for us, is space and limitations on the space. Now, Jesse, you asked a question about the ratio, the adult ratio, which is partially what we tried to tackle with our plan. So to have 25 new reading teachers at 8 schools changes that ratio and changes that in a targeted way. Some schools that are targeted will be able to use those teachers and pull out rooms that are being separate classroom spaces. Some won't, depending on the school.
We have the number for what's it take to reduce class size by 1 at last year's staffing rates for K1. Class size by 1 is?
So in the budget process, we were asked that question last year. So to reduce K1 by 1 student across the district is about 1.5 million.
I have a short question, I think. Under strategy number 6, when we're talking about the increased mental health partnership to provide basic services to students, how are the parents involved in services that we're providing to students?
I don't know if I have a great answer to that.
I don't either. That may be something, Director Hine, we may have to come back to you on that one.
Okay, that's fine.
Because I don't know, I think it depends on the service provider and the model. Just my own experience with these, with different service providers. Some of them provide wraparound services for the family and kind of a family counseling setting, and some of them provide more student-specific services. But we can get back to you on that.
But we wouldn't have direct counseling with a student without parent.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Right,
But
what I'm
I thought
asking
you were
is
asking,
the
do they
parent
go-
involvement in their knowing that the
Oh.
services are being
Oh, I'm
provided
sorry.
and that they're okay with the services being provided by the school district.
I apologize. I thought you were talking about counseling
For the parent.
for the
No.
family,
you were
and
not.
I don't,
No.
and I don't know about that. Families are notified. There's a process for notifying families. Most of our counseling, you have to come in and do an intake with the parent or guardian who's with that student to be able to set a therapeutic counseling plan over time. And then there's regular check-ins. Now, some of that includes family-based counseling as well, and I could get back to you on that, but I don't have a
Right.
great idea of
It
that.
was more just making sure that parents are informed and in agreement with what we're doing
Absolutely.
for and with their children.
Yeah, they are.
Danielle?
So I have this sustainable theme in my life. I think sustainability is key, especially when we're providing education and long-term, not just a drop in the bucket that we're going to provide for a year or two. So, and I may get this wrong, but in Plan A, you have about 74% of the resources allocated to personnel.
Yeah.
How are you going to maintain that long-term, and where is the funding for that going to come from overall?
I've been looking over
I
this
know.
direction to
Mr.
our
Wolf, can you help me out?
Chief
Sure.
Operations Officer. Thanks, Mike.
Sure. So a couple of things. We want to make sure that we've got some of the basic assumptions in place, right? So remember, this revenue is supported by corporate activity tax, and so each biennium, there'll be a different projection of how much. So let's assume that the same amount goes on forever, number one. And then number two, you can look at 5 to 7% increase in costs per year. So at a 5 to 7% increased cost per year, this amount at the 74, 26% breakdown that you just mentioned would last approximately 5 to 7 years before we would be maxed out on those assumptions. Now, if the costs increase, it would be less. If the costs decrease, it would be more. If we don't hire 100% of staff, obviously that extends the years. So it just really, at the gross level, you'd have to say it doesn't last forever, but it should last at least 5 to 7 years, assuming the assumptions I just talked about hold true. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Director Kylo, Paul, do you have a question?
I do. I just want to comment, these meetings go much better when you're on cold medication, just so you know, for the future. But my question is, and I looked over the plan, and I went through all the meetings, did all the nonsense. My question is this: do we have a priority list of programs that we will keep or not keep if we can't reach the staffing levels that we're targeting? So the answer is yes or no, we have a list, or no, we don't have a priority list.
Yes.
Okay,
All right.
good. That's all I was asking. So I don't want to offend anybody with my questions, so thank you.
Okay, moving back to our budget committee, is there another question from the budget committee? Lillian, are you on the budget committee?
I am not on the budget committee. However, I am monitoring the Google Hangout that is happening currently, where
okay.
Cynthia Stinson is currently in that platform, and because she's homesick as well. She hasn't referenced any medications like Paul, but she said, is the hope that the community resource specialists and the strategic partnership and engagement coordinator built on the community engagement that this SIA process has begun in a new way?
How would our Director of Communications and Community Relations like to answer that?
100%, absolutely. You know, what our team learned through this process was a lot of ways that we, well, A, we got better, and B, there are a number of ways that we can continue to be better, more intentional, seek culturally relevant and culturally specific feedback so that we're ensuring that when we move forward in our communications, in our operations, in the way that we do business in Salem-Keizer, we're reflecting a really authentic and genuine community voice in that.
Thank you. Levy?
How much would it cost to eliminate high school participation fees for students on free or reduced lunch, and how close could this budget get us to?
So I I have a dollar figure for you, but I'm not sure it's going to completely answer your question. So we currently collect just under $600,000 a year in pay-to-play fees. And pay-to-play fees include regular fees for students who do not qualify for free and reduced lunch, and reduced fees for students who do qualify for free and reduced lunch. So that number of about $600,000 we increased to $750,000 in hoping that we could not necessarily eliminate, but greatly, greatly reduce the fees. We're discussing the value of having families and students have some skin in the game, even by paying a moderate $10 fee, just to acknowledge that they're committed to the sport or the activity. We don't have any sort of finality on that, but I don't have the dollar figure to be able to tell you what portion of that is specifically just kids that are on free and reduced lunch. But I do believe that the $750,000 is a generous start and would get our kids who are currently participating covered and would give us enough cushion to really extend and provide access to other kids.
Any other person with a question on the budget committee? Okay, we'll start back with you, Satya. Do you have a second question? No. No, okay. Sharon?
I promise this will just be one question.
No commas, no
No commas, no.
no semicolons.
Um,
Okay.
So the ninth grade, the two additional math teachers for ninth grade reading, my favorite topic of discussion that we talk about a lot. Would that model be similar to what I think it's McKay has used the last few years, where it's additional supports, or this is to reduce the actual size of the students in class? And I guess the question is really about, so even if there are fewer students in the classroom, if a student feels as though they're behind, say for a day or 2 days or 3 days, and it just snowballs and they continue to get behind, regardless of the number of students in the classroom, how will this help them? Will this give them the supports they need outside of the classroom, like they've done at McKay?
So 2 answers to your one question. The first being that I believe it would be important for the math teams at the targeted schools to do a lot of the input and investigation into how to best utilize the FTE coming to their department. So we have a cadre of Algebra 1 teachers in a high school, and we have additional FTE pushing into that high school. That team, along with their leaders, needs to have conversations about what is the model that works. We are not necessarily tied to an exact model that needs to be replicated in the exact same manner across those 2 schools. That being said, even the pushing in of additional FTE for math is not going to solve a systems problem. So what you're really referring to is what are the other systems and mechanisms that will be in place to prevent those kids from falling through the cracks and ensuring that they get the access that they need. And that brings us right back to MTSS. So what are the ways that we are first ensuring high quality core instruction, and then for those kids, just like that medical model, that need something else, that are falling outside of those national norms and are not making the growth or the progress that we want, how are we responding purposefully, targeting to catch them back up and get them back on track with the rest of the class? So really that portion is not sitting in SIA as a high school math or a ninth grade on track strategy as much as that rests within the MTSS system as a whole.
Thank you.
Kathy, still no questions?
No, so that was a great answer. And especially with Algebra 1, since I have a grandson that flunked that 2 years ago, and I'm familiar with that problem.
Jesse?
Yeah, I got another one. No semicolons, no commas, no exclamation mark. All right, so this one is has to do with the socio-emotional implementation. On the presentation, it was slide number 26. And then on the SIA app, it's going to be, let's see, it says community, page 3, page number 15.
Okay.
And so in this, this is just a clarification question. It could just be just wording. But in the middle schools, we had, we're doing 11 zones of regulation spaces for students with anxiety, trauma, or counseling needs. And in the high schools, it says we're doing 7 safe spaces to provide respite for students with anxiety, trauma, or urgent needs. So one of them is a safe space, the other one is a zone of regulation space. Is there a difference, and what is the difference if so?
The difference is that we have two coordinators, one director of middle schools and one director of high schools, and as these concepts fleshed out, they simply have given them different titles at this point. It would certainly seem reasonable to me that as we move into an actual implementation, that we probably identify them by a similar name. We're just not there yet.
Okay, so the same thing, just different. Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
What is a sheltered instruction? I heard that term used several times. I don't know that I've heard it before. If I did, it went like that. I didn't really know what it meant.
So sheltered instruction is the way that we want to provide and ensure that students who are learning English get access to grade level, high quality content. So the content in a science class shouldn't be watered down because a student who speaks a different language doesn't yet have the vocabulary. So we shelter content, meaning that we use different kinds of strategies, visuals or sentence frames, audio cues. There's all sorts of different sheltered strategies that allow us to give kids who cognitively can master and learn difficult material. They just don't yet have the English vocabulary. So it's just a fancy term to make sure that kids, particularly in middle school and high school, get access to rich content, that we're not watering down what they get. We just are providing extra supports and scaffolds to get them to the high quality content, even though they don't have the vocabulary yet.
Okay, thank you. Danielle, do you have any more questions?
Oh, yes, I do. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for incorporating CSOCs into this concept. Personally speaking, as the chamber director in Keizer, I work with all the CSOCs in Keizer, and I was pretty disappointed to find out that the Kennedy CSOCs position was cut so aggressively this school year in a school that really relies on that community support person. So I assume that they'll get theirs back, hopefully at a full time. Even at 6 hours a day, I'm over the moon. So thank you for doing that. And I just want to clarify that, because you didn't say this in your presentation, you said, you kept saying 6, and then you kept referring to FTE. And so I assumed that was 6 hours a day at minimum, even though you did say they could get up to 8.
Yeah, I think we need to engage in some dialogue with the schools. The actual budget dollar that's currently in there, I believe, is the full FTE. I should check that. There is some thought process that the best utilized CSOC is present when the students are on site. So we just need to engage further in that dialogue, and I need to clarify and figure out for sure what is the actual level of FTE, whether they're actually funded at 8 hours in the financials or if they're funded at 6.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I do. I want to make sure I heard correctly during the long presentation that the understanding I received was that the coaching positions that are being created or added are expected to be in the classrooms more and doing more hands-on teaching rather than being administrators. They're supposed to be actual coaches. Is that correct? Yes, no?
Yes, and in most of the cases, these are direct supports. We still have some positions that we're calling coaches, like the PBIS coach, which really is a professional development coach, a coach to teachers, and not providing direct supports to kids or co-teaching. But many of the coaching positions that we described, the math coaches directly in schools, the biliteracy coaches directly in schools with teachers and kids, the ELD coaches, the middle school math coaches, a majority of that population, those positions, even though we're using the word coach, are direct supports assigned to schools, assigned to classrooms with kids.
Yeah, okay.
Budget committee, does anybody have a question? Levy?
So activity 10.3, professional development and equity, social justice, and restorative practices. Is in the process that you're looking to address this, what is the role of community members in that? Just the way that it's described right here, I think it leaves me very confused, and actually, I've had a hard time finding research-based social justice curriculum, so that's why I'm a little bit concerned. Not too much, but just a little bit. And if you found research-based social justice curriculum, I would love to take a look at it because I've been looking for it for many years. So I'm wanting to hear like what role is the community going to play in this, in implementing that activity?
And I appreciate you asking that question. And we went back and forth on, is the best place for this in equity, diversity, and inclusion, or is the best place for this work in our community engagement, our ongoing community engagement? Because one of the things that we learned with from this process is that without linking those things, we won't be able to advance our EDI principles without bringing in community partners, without bringing in our parents as well to engage in this. And so we went back and forth of whether to call it out on equity, diversity, and inclusion or embed it, because I do think it needs to be an integral part of our engagement process moving forward.
Just clarify. So the reason why I'm highlighting it is because the way it reads, I just wouldn't want to see it as implemented as hiring a consultant.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
okay.
that,
Okay, I appreciate that.
Any other questions from the budget committee? Satya?
I just want to imagine if I'm a child the family is homeless and sleeping in the car and, kind of having to move now. You have to move everywhere, right? Now in front of Rite Aid or wherever else it is. And the teacher sends a homework via Google Chrome and I don't have a place to sleep, yet I have to get my homework ready. And I was kind of listening to the entire presentation. I'm just wondering and maybe my parents can teach me a little bit. So where is the place for that, where the children can have extended hours and maybe access to the library where the Wi-Fi is available, and where the parents can come and sit with the child and probably help finish, or a community member can come and sit with the school and help finish? What would it take to extend that library? Like in colleges, we have the libraries open. Mm-hmm. And that would, at least in the short run, give the child a place. They can probably take a shower, maybe have an evening meal, and do their homework with a non-profit after-school homework tutoring, and then go home and sleep in the car and then come back to school next morning. What would it take? Where will it fit in? I'm just trying to search through all the 11 points, and I couldn't see where it will fit in. What will be the cost projection for having that model? Because I don't want that child to be left out on the digital divide.
So
I don't know if I made my question clear.
Yeah. We didn't run the projections on what that would cost to be able to run a like a 21st century learning center type model.
I just want the library hours extended a little bit longer because we know Wi-Fi is there in school library, where a nonprofit can come and work, or maybe the parent can come and sit with the child, and maybe there's a bathroom and shower available. What would that kind of scenario take? Because we have close to 2,000 kids, I'm told, that who are challenged housing-wise.
Yes.
And we are also talking about parents wanting to learn some skills. A lot of these immigrant parents also, you can teach both together, the adult capability of parenting the child all in one setting. And then we can invite other public serving agencies to have an office in the school after hours so they can enroll them for whatever is needed. What would that kind of thing will take in one-stop shopping? I don't know if I'm asking my question clearly.
No, I think you're asking a question. You're painting a picture of a program which would be kind of a holistic program that would serve kids differently than we're serving them now. Part of that could be through our after-school programming that we have targeted with community-based organizations, because I think we need to realize we can't do this work on our own, and we need to nurture those relationships with organizations that are outside in the community now. And
that's not my question. Where will it be located? Where will I, as a child, know where I can go and get Wi-Fi and a warm place where I can do my homework?
so
Can that be the school library itself?
I don't know how to answer your question.
Can I ask him, so are you asking, how come we're not just keeping our libraries and our schools open a little longer every day?
Colleges, the libraries are open.
So I think they're trying to answer your question because there is a program that exists. We just don't currently offer it here in the district. So maybe elaborate on that program a little that you were talking about, the holistic?
So there's, so thank you for the clarification, and I apologize if I don't answer your question, what you're thinking. What you're proposing is I think is kind of an extended services model. So we haven't run the costs on that. So we haven't developed a specific budgeting process for that. However, there are programs, and the 21st Century Learning Center is one, Schools Uniting Neighborhoods is another, where, and that's in Portland. I think it's in 37 schools in Portland. And we reached out to them as part of this process to learn how they're doing that. So they have a community-based organization who comes into the school for after hours to provide exactly the types of services you're saying. It's not just opening up the library. If we're going to be able to provide parent education, it's a much more expansive program than that. If we're going to provide a meal, if we're going to have reduced barriers to that. So we don't have that costed out in this proposal. Where you'd find some semblances of that and starting to learn from that would be in our extracurricular. So we have $900,000 at the elementary level and about $1.3 million at the middle level to be able to start getting our toe in the water on what that could look like.
One of our things we learned is we also don't have a lot of community-based organizations, especially culturally specific ones. So we're also working to try to figure out, as there's other grants and stuff available, how do we help encourage more community-based organizations as well. So it's not there in the form you're looking for it. There's some places you could point to some of that.
Can I ask
Sharon?
a follow-up on that?
Can you wait? Because, to be fair to everybody. Thank you. Sharon?
Yeah, and I just have one more because I know we have a lot of public comment, so.
Yeah, at this point, we don't have time to hear everybody, probably.
Yeah, okay. Just one last question. So all of this is based around equity and inclusion and diversity, and I so much appreciate how that is all embedded. And we're talking a lot about culturally responsive and all of that. But what I didn't see in here is for where does this address our LGBTQ students? How will that be addressed through these various?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the idea of the safe spaces or the zones of regulation space actually was raised up. So our LGBTQ plus population wasn't called out as a specific subpopulation from ODE, but we did have a lot of parents and a lot of concerns raised from that population in our group. So the idea of having a safe space is one small way to be able to do that. I can just tell you for Linda and I both, some of the most powerful learning that we engaged in was listening to LGBTQ plus kids, middle schoolers, who are transitioning or who are navigating that, and it was a really powerful listening session for us. So I think another layer of support would be, how do we target resources for that? We know that they are one of our most at-risk, socio-emotional health-wise, they're one of our most at-risk populations across, and we've seen lots of evidence of that.
And I think one of the things we've heard more than anything coming out of kids' mouths was, before we do anything, we need to just ask them. They know what they need, they know what they want. So I don't believe that we are in a place where, beginning in 2021, we will build a robust plan. What I am committed to is building robust opportunities to sit down with kids face to face and listen and figure out what are the pieces that we need to begin to put in place. They know what they need. They know better than we do. And so we just need to be mindful of what that's actually going to look like moving ahead.
Kathy?
No, I'm ready to go with people asking.
Okay. Jesse?
Yeah, I had one. So on slide 11, and then referenced again on one of the last ones, slide 42, you mentioned develop a small alternative high school under the socio-emotional implementation, and it made the top of both lists. And so 2 hours and 20 minutes ago, I wrote that down as one of my questions, and I would like to hear you touched on it briefly, but I am still, it seems like complete vagary, so I'd like a little bit more detail.
And I think that detail probably will come to you in a different report that may, we actually could bring you an alternative education redesign report. That's not landing squarely in the student investment account as a funding source, but there are significant conversations about program development, all sorts of different things, increasing access for kids before they get expelled, but that won't rest solely in here. So it may be something that board leadership just wants us to bring as a standalone topic.
Okay, yeah.
And part of it is that we're really pushing to have bigger conversations around the design, not just changing locations, and one of our design groups is doing that beginning design work just next week. So that's why it's vagary in this. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Danielle?
I have one last question. So we've talked a lot about transportation and after-school access, and I just want to thank you, Linda. I think it was last week we touched base briefly on the challenges that some of our high school students are experiencing over the fact that they get out of school at 2:35 and they can't be at school after 3 p.m., but they have to be back at 5 p.m. to get on a bus or whatever. I know that you said that was a pretty simple fix. I'm really hoping that's the case. But what are the priorities in this across the board about transportation and access to after-school programs for our students, particularly the populations we're discussing under this requirement?
That could be a question for Mike around our transportation package.
Yes. Let me start off by saying, first of all, this is something that we're absolutely committed to continue working on. It's not a simple solution across the board in our district. We do think that as much as we can create the opportunities for flexibility within our transportation system, like for instance, the opportunities for students shouldn't solely be dictated by our routing system for our yellow buses. And yet, we have some real limitations and capacity issues with our existing yellow fleet. So we're looking at other avenues which would be non-yellow vehicles. So vans, activity vehicles, which don't require a CDL. So anything we can do to create flexibility for our schools, like the high schools have activity vans, and we can look at opportunities across the board in K-12 for alternative other than yellow. Yellow comes online after 4:30 because that's when the buses have delivered kids home. Well, that doesn't always fit with the programming for an after-school program. And so we've got to really look at other ways to meet those needs. And like I said earlier, we're committed to do that. We don't have the ultimate solution in place right now.
So thank you for the transportation component. But back to the conversation, because I've heard, and I love that we're working on transportation, but more importantly, how are we expanding access on site for kids after school to stay in place so moms don't have to get off at 3:30 in the afternoon to go get their kids from home to return them to school at 5?
And some of that might be a funding issue, but really a majority of that is just a thinking about doing business differently. So if we are currently closing schools and, clearing student body out because that's a lack of supervision issue or a safety or security issue, those are adjustments that can be made and should be talked about regardless of whether we build that into a financial package. And that was what you and I discussed last week, is identifying the ways that we can solve some problems without having to put additional money to it, because there are things that we can do in shifting schedules, building efficiencies into the way we use our resources to ensure that a kid can sit in a study hall or can sit in the commons with an adult and do their homework or hang out with friends in a supervised setting before they have to come back for practice.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, do you have any more questions?
With us picking up some of the costs, the more students can participate, does that also mean we'll put a limit on how much a program can fundraise or hit up the parents or the students for extra funds for trips or choir robes or whatever?
He was asking about the activity. Paul, could you repeat the question? We didn't have the mic or your phone by the mic.
My question is in regard to the activities, and if we're taking over some of the funding for those activities to make them more accessible, are we also contemplating putting limits on the programs as to how much they can spend or make to avoid having to do excessive fundraising, which could then limit students and parents and families' participation.
So I don't have a specific answer to that question, and I'm partially hesitating because a significant player in those programs are music programs, and we are currently in the process of seeking a new coordinator of music and drama. So some of those conversations would come under the direction of that newly hired administrator. But I hear where you're going, and I do think it's important for us, particularly in an equity-based conversation, to come back around and visit that.
Oh, sorry. Budget Committee, any final questions? No. Satya? Final question? No. Sean? Kathy's a pass. Jesse?
I just had something really quick I wanted to say. Not a question. It has a period at the end. But I just want to say thank you. Something I've been pushing hard on is for dual language, because I think a whole district should be dual language. And so I really appreciate the fact that you guys took a look at this, and I think it's great that we're getting the district trainers and the coordinator in. I think that's awesome. So thank you.
Danielle? No. Paul, final question?
No.
Okay, we are done with that part. Going to be moving on to public testimony. We do not have enough time to hear everybody, so we're going to start with parents, and we're going to try to get to everybody, so if you don't take your full time, that will allow other people to speak. And also, if there's a bunch of you who are going to say the same thing, come stand together and have one person speak, and then we can see how many of them there are. I don't believe there is one, Mindy.
When we signed up, I thought it was in order. I just like to know what board policy is for that.
I don't believe there is a policy on that.
The board chair regulates the policy on public speaking, and she's indicated that there was a change in the agenda to how the speaking would go. So she has broad authority to regulate the amount of time and the length of time for public speaking.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Vicki Mashos, and then we are going to start for the people that need translation. So for the 6 of you who need translation, if you could queue up so that we can move it as quickly as possible to give everybody in the room a chance to speak. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Vicki Mashos. I have a daughter in 6th grade and a son in 8th grade, both who are in the dual language program at Parrish Middle School. I'm here to speak tonight on their behalf because I have significant concerns with the small numbers of students who are actually heard in this process. In the materials provided, I see that the Panorama Survey is being used as evidence of student input. However, while the Panorama Survey provides insights into students' social and emotional well-being, it does not allow students to give any input regarding what changes they would like to see, what new ideas they have, or how they best think these funds should be allocated. I also see in the materials that students were invited to participate into the community-wide forums that were held in the evenings. However, judging from the numbers, very few of the 42,000 students participated. Evenings often do not work for students who are involved with after-school sports or activities, who have part-time jobs, or who take care of younger siblings. Point in fact, I would have had my children here with me this evening, but they both had other activities. Could there have been a better way to hear from students? Maybe holding listening sessions during lunches at our middle schools or high schools would have given more students access to actually participate and share their ideas. In the materials, it also says that 22,000 students were sent a survey about the SIA fund. Well, I heard about this, and so I asked my son. He had no idea what I was talking about. So we looked through his email, and we finally found it. This survey arrived Tuesday, December 3rd, and responses were due Wednesday, December 4th. So students were given 24 hours to provide their input. How is this authentic engagement opportunities? Students, you're right, students have firsthand knowledge of what the issues facing our schools are. And students deserve some real opportunities to actually have their voice included. Now, I know it's the middle of February, and the district wants to present this plan in 2 weeks. It might be impossible to stop this train at this point. But we need to do just that. We need to hit the brakes, and we need to actually hear from our students, because this train is leaving our students behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicki? Oh, sorry, Mariano Orta? Please, if you're a parent here that needs translation services, please queue up so that we can give everybody in the room that wanted to talk a chance. I show 6 people that had signed up. So, Mariano?
Yes. Buenas tardes, Presidenta, Merty Helen, Vicepresidente Jesse Lippold, y todos los miembros de la Junta Escolar y el Superintendente Christy Perry. Mi nombre es Mariano Horta y tengo 2 nietos en las escuelas de Salem-Keizer. Vivo en el área de Northgate. Además, soy uno de los portavoces del grupo de liderazgo de padres de la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer, que representa a miles de padres latinos. En nombre de todos estos miles de padres latinos de Salem-Keizer, gracias a la legislatura de Oregon y la gobernadora Kate Brown por aprobar la ley de éxito estudiantil. En 1994, los votantes de Oregon nos dieron la medida 11 para enviar a prisión a miles de nuestros niños que necesitaban ayuda académica, emocional y de comportamiento. La famosa tubería de la escuela a la prisión. Gracias a la medida 11, hemos perdido 2 generaciones de estudiantes latinos que nunca se graduaron, pero que en realidad terminaron en la cárcel porque no tenían la ayuda académica, emocional y de comportamiento que necesitaban para graduarse de la escuela secundaria. Los padres queremos que la Junta Escolar apruebe todas las recomendaciones que el Grupo de Trabajo Comunitario de CIA le dio a ustedes y las estrategias de la superintendente presentadas esta noche. Estas recomendaciones se sienten para nosotros como una ley de derechos civiles y educacionales que nuestros niños y jóvenes han estado esperando durante 2 generaciones. Por su atención, gracias.
Thank you for providing the testimony in English. Okay, you going to read it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good evening, Board Chairwoman Marty Hain, Vice President Jesse Leopold, and all the members of the school board and Superintendent Christy Perry. My name is Mariano Horta, and I have 2 grandchildren in the Salem-Keizer School District. I live in the Northgate area. Also, I am one of the spokespersons for the parent leadership group of the Salem-Keizer Coalition of Equality, representing thousands of Latino parents. On behalf of all these thousands of Salem-Keizer Latino parents, thanks to the Oregon legislator and Governor Kate Brown for passing the Student Success Act. In 1994, Oregon voters gave us Measure 11 to send thousands of our children in need of academic and emotional behavior help to prison, the famous school-to-prison pipeline. Because of Measure 11, We have lost parts of two generations of Latino students who have never graduated, but who actually ended up in prison because they did not have the academic help and emotional and behavioral support they needed to graduate from high school. We parents want the school board to approve all the recommendations that the SIA Community Task Force gave you and the superintendent's strategies presented tonight. These recommendations feel to us as a Civil Rights and Educational Rights Act that our children and youth have been waiting for 2 generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Alma Luma?
Buenas tardes, Presidenta de la Mesa Directiva, Marty Hayen, y Vice President Jesse Lepo, y todos los miembros de la Mesa Directiva y la Superintendente Christy Perry. Me llamo Alma Luma y tengo 2 nietos en el Distrito Escolar de Salem-Keizer y vivo en el área del noreste de Salem. Soy también de una de las portavoces del grupo de padres y madres líderes de la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer, quienes representamos a miles de padres latinos. En nombre de todos estos miles de padres latinos de Salem-Keizer, gracias a la legislatura de Oregon y a la gobernadora Kay Brown por aprobar la ley del éxito estudiantil. Como todos saben, esta es la primera vez que se tienen en cuenta opinión de la comunidad latina. Esta ha sido una oportunidad única para todos en Salem-Keizer de poder escuchar a las preocupaciones de padres y nuestra comunidad latina. Es importante comprender claramente que la intención de esta ley es cerrar la brecha educativa de niños y jóvenes que nunca han sido entendidos adecuadamente en las escuelas. Esa es la razón por la que como miembros de la mesa directiva de nuestras escuelas, ustedes deben recordar que todas las partes de este plan de la superintendente Perry está ofreciendo a nuestra comunidad debe de incluir la política de los lentes de equidad que ustedes aprobaron 4 años atrás. Ahora es el momento de tomar la decisión de defender a nuestros hijos. Les pido a todos ustedes el aprobar estas recomendaciones del Grupo de Trabajo Comunitario del SIA para empezar el compromiso que la ley del éxito del estudiante demanda a todos nosotros. Las familias tienen derecho a participar en la toma de decisiones importantes dentro del distrito escolar. Las escuelas necesitamos continuar trabajando en la comunicación entre padres y escuelas y todos estos tienen que hacerse en un entorno de colaboración mutua. Los padres siempre hemos sabido que nuestra participación es una pieza clave para apoyar el éxito de nuestros hijos. Le doy mucho crédito al programa de participación de padres y madres de la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer. Ha estado implementando durante 20 años para ayudar a los padres y ayudar a nuestros hijos a ir siempre a la escuela y presentar atención a los maestros para lograr el éxito académico, graduarse en la escuela secundaria. Gracias.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board Chairwoman Marty Hine, Vice President Jesse Leopold, and all board members and Superintendent Chrissy Perry. My name is Alma Luma. I have 2 grandchildren in the Salem-Keizer School District. I live in the Northeast Salem area. I am also one of the spokespersons of the Salem-Keizer Coalition for Equality Parent Leadership Group, representing thousands of Latino parents. On behalf of all of these thousands of Latino parents of Salem-Keizer, thanks to the Oregon legislator and Governor Kate Brown for approving the Student Success Act. As you all know, this is the first time the opinion of the Latino community is taken into account. This has been a unique opportunity for everyone in Salem-Keizer to hear the concerns that the Latino community and parents have. It is important to clearly understand that the intent of this law is to close the educational gap of children and youth who have never been properly served in schools. This is why you, as members of the school board of directors of our schools, must remember that all parts of this plan that Superintendent Perry is offering to our community must have embedded the equity lens you approved 4 years ago. Now is the time for you to make a decision to stand up for our children. I ask all board members and the superintendent to approve this proposal from the SIA Community Task Force to carry out the commitment that the student success law demands from all of us. Families have the right to participate in making important decisions inside the district and schools. We need to continue working on communication between parents and schools, and all of this has to be in the mutual collaboration environment.
Sorry, I'm going to need to stop you because we have too many people.
Absolutely.
We have the full copy of her
Thank you.
testimony in English. Angelica Lagos. Go ahead.
Buenas noches, Presidenta Marlene Herlen, Vicepresidente Jesse Lipon y todos los miembros de la mesa directiva y Superintendente Christian Perry. Mi nombre es Angélica Lagos. Yo tengo 3 niñas en el distrito escolar de Salem-Keizer. Yo vivo en la área de Salem. Soy una de las madres líderes del grupo de liderazgo de padres y madres de la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer. Presentando miles de latinos, llevamos 25 años esperando que llegue esta ley. Hoy yo estoy aquí para líderes que aprueben la propuesta del grupo de trabajo de la CIA realizó para que finalmente se lleve a cabo la inversión educativa de nuestros hijos latinos de las escuelas públicas de Salem-Keizer. Nuestros hijos e hijas se están enfrentando diariamente a muchas barreras y esta inversión sería una manera de hacer una gran diferencia en la trayectoria educacional de nuestros hijos y reducir la desigualdad de oportunidades del rendimiento estudiantil. Una de las prioridades para nuestros hijos latinos es el aumento de la diversidad multicultural del personal. Esto incluye a los maestros, consejeros y apoyo en el salón de clase. Ellos necesitan ver en sus clases maestros que se miren como ellos. También necesitamos especialistas bilingües y multiculturales en recursos comunitarios, trabajando con colaboración con nuestra organización latina como la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer para apoyar el envolvimiento efectivo de padres y madres. Todas las recomendaciones del grupo de trabajo de la cuenta de inversión estudiantil debe siempre implementarse con el enfoque mandatorio de los lentes de equidad que ustedes aprobaron hace 3 años. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board Chairwoman Marty Hine, Vice President Jesse Leopold, and all board members and Superintendent Chrissy Perry. My name is Angelica Lagos, and I have 3 children in the Salem-Keizer School District, and I live in Keizer. I am one of the mother leaders of the Parents Leadership Group of the Salem-Keizer Coalition of Equality, representing thousands of Latino parents. Today, I'm here to ask you to approve the proposal that the SIA Community Task Force presented to you to finally implement the educational investments in our Latino children and youth of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. Our children are facing many daily barriers, and this investment would make a big difference in the education of our children by reducing the inequality of opportunities to student achievement. One of the priorities of our Latino children and parents is the increase in the bilingual, bicultural staff. This includes teachers, counselors, and supports in the classroom. Our students need to see teachers and staff who look like them. We also need bilingual, bicultural CSOCs working in collaboration with our Latino organizations, such as the Salem-Keizer Coalition of Equality, to support the effective involvement of fathers and mothers. The recommendation of the SIA Community Task Force were created with the equity lens that you adopted 4 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacquelina Chavez.
Buenas tardes, presidenta de la mesa directiva, Marty, y vicepresidenta Jaycee, y todos los miembros de la mesa directiva y la superintendente Cristi Perry. Me llamo Jacqueline Chávez. Yo tengo un hijo en el distrito escolar de Salem-Keizer, vivo en el área del noreste de Salem. Soy también una de las madres líderes del grupo de padres y madres líderes de la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer, quienes representamos a miles de padres y madres latinos. En nombre de estos miles de padres y madres latinos de Salem-Keizer, gracias a la legislatura de Oregon y a la gobernadora Kate Brown por aprobar la ley del éxito estudiantil. Quisiera que todos los miembros de la mesa directiva y la superintendente y sus miembros del gabinete entiendan la gran importancia de fomentar la adquisición del lenguaje inglés a través de la importancia de fomentarla, de ayudarles a nuestros niños con su español a temprana edad. Esto es la clave para que ellos puedan seguir sus estudios en inglés a nivel de cada grado hasta llegar a la preparatoria. Por favor, denle mucho énfasis financiero a esta problemática. Si ustedes apoyan el plan estratégico que nos está ofreciendo la superintendente Perry, todos vamos a poder celebrar el éxito académico de nuestros estudiantes de inglés como segunda lengua a la hora de la graduación. Es importante que comprendan claramente que la intención de esta ley es cerrar la brecha educativa de niños y jóvenes que nunca han sido entendidos adecuadamente en las escuelas. Este es caso con los niños que necesitan la ayuda para aprender inglés a temprana edad. Ustedes tienen todo el apoyo de los padres latinos. Siempre hemos sabido que nuestra participación es una pieza clave para apoyar el éxito estudiantil de nuestros hijos. Gracias.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, President of the Board of Directors, Marty Hine, Vice President Jesse Leopold, and all the members of the Board of Directors and Superintendent Christy Perry. My name is Jacquelina Chavez. I have one son in the Salem-Keizer School District, and I live in the northeast area of Salem. I am also one of the leaders of the Parents Leadership Group of the Salem-Keizer Coalition of Equality, who represents thousands of Latino fathers and mothers. On behalf of all the thousands of Salem-Keizer fathers and mothers, thanks to the Oregon legislator and Governor Kate Brown for passing the Student Success Act. I would like all the members of the Board of Directors and the superintendent and their members of the cabinet to understand the great importance of encouraging the acquisition of English through helping our children with their Spanish at an early age. This is a key so that they can continue their studies in English at each grade level until they reach high school. Please give a lot of financial emphasis to this problem. If you support the strategic plan that Superintendent Perry is offering us, we will all be able to celebrate the academic success of our English language learners at the time of graduation. It is important to clearly understand that the intention of this law is to close the educational achievement gap of children and young people who have never been adequately cared in our schools. This is a case with children who need help learning English at an early age. You have all the support of the Latino parents. Parents have always known that our participation is a key piece to support the success of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Javier Guido. Sorry.
Buenas noches, presidenta de la mesa directiva, señora Marty Hayen, y los miembros de la mesa y superintendente Christy Perry. Me llamo Javier Quevedo, tengo 2 hijos en las escuelas públicas de Salem-Keizer. Vivo en el área del noroeste de Salem. Soy uno de los principales padres del grupo de liderazgo de padres y madres de la Coalición para la Igualdad de Salem-Keizer, que representa a miles de padres latinos. Una de las necesidades que enfrentan nuestros hijos es el apoyo a la salud mental. Además, se necesitan más trabajadores sociales y consejeros que sean bilingües y biculturales para ayudarnos de manera más efectiva. También es muy importante contar con terapeutas dentro de las escuelas y tener especialistas en salud mental que estén disponibles a ayudar a los jóvenes. Es muy importante que estos servicios sean accesibles en diferentes idiomas para cumplir con el espíritu de la ley de éxito estudiantil y la política de lentes de equidad del distrito escolar. Además, como padres necesitamos más recursos en nuestro idioma sobre problemas de salud mental y de comportamiento de niños y jóvenes. La mejor manera de ayudar a nuestros hijos es trabajar con nosotros como familias. Estos son nuestros hijos y queremos lo mejor para ellos. A veces no sabemos cómo satisfacer sus necesidades, especialmente en las áreas de problemas de salud mental y comportamiento. Inclúyanos en las soluciones que están planeando, al igual que nos incluyan para descubrir las necesidades de nuestros niños. Gracias.
Thank you. Good evening, Board Chairwoman. This is Marty Hine, and Board members and Superintendent Christy Perry. My name is Javier Quevedo. I have 2 children in the Salem-Keizer Public Schools. I live in the Northeast Salem area. I am one of the leading parents of the Salem-Keizer Coalition for Equality Parents Leadership Group, representing thousands of Latino parents. One of the needs that our children are facing is mental health support. Also, more social workers and counselors who are bilingual and bicultural are needed to help them more effectively. It is also very important to have therapists within the schools and accessible mental health specialists. It is very important that these services are accessible in different languages in order to comply with the spirit of the Student Success Law and the district's equity lens policy. Also, as parents, we need more resources in our language about mental health and behavior problems of children and youth. The best way to help our children is to work with us as families. These are our children, and we want the best for them. Sometimes we don't know how to provide for their needs, especially in the areas of mental health and behavior problems. Include us in the solutions you are planning, just like you include us in finding out the needs of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Andreas Quevedo.
Buenas noches, miembros de la mesa directiva y superintendentes Perry. Mi nombre es Andrés García. Yo quiero hablar con ustedes esta noche acerca de las necesidades urgentes de tener equipos, traducción de alta calidad para los padres puedan escuchar a los intérpretes, traductores en ambos oídos. Es muy difícil el poder concentrarse en el significado de los párrafos cuando es tan difícil escuchar claramente a los traductores, intérpretes. También no todas las escuelas tienen suficientes equipos para poder tener reuniones de padres en múltiples escuelas al mismo tiempo. Gracias.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the school board and Superintendent Perry. My name is Andres Garcia. I want to talk with you tonight about the urgent need to have translation equipment of higher quality so that parents can hear the interpreters in both ears. It's very difficult to concentrate on significant paragraphs when it is so difficult to hear the translators and interpreters clearly. Also, the schools don't have enough equipment to have parent meetings in multiple schools at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you for doing our interpretation. Tyler. Following Tyler will be Yadira Juarez. So if you could be ready to jump up right after Tyler. Okay.
Good evening, members of the school board and Superintendent Perry. I'm Tyler Skella-Lakeberg, the Vice President of the Salem-Keizer Education Association, speaking on behalf of my members. Tonight you've seen the SIA proposed plan, a plan that does little to address a reduction of class size or caseload. Throughout this process, some of our district leaders have quoted research saying that class size does not matter. I stand before you tonight to say, I agree. Class size does not matter. Class size does not matter if all of my students come from a high socioeconomic status. Class size does not matter if all of my students read at or above grade level. Class size does not matter if my students come from a high-functioning, emotionally supportive household with parents that can navigate the educational process. In that case, give me 35, 40, 50 students in a class. I will teach them the standards, they will pass, graduate, and most likely go on to college because their parents also are college graduates. But in my 20 years in this district, that is not the classes I've had. My classes were made up of students living in poverty, navigating homelessness, students learning English, overcoming learning disabilities, students struggling with gender identities and racial injustices, students coming from households full of trauma. In this process, I've also heard the district talk about that one of the key factors of success is for students, especially students at need, to make a positive connection to an adult, usually a teacher at school. I absolutely agree with this, but our system is not conducive to that. With such large class sizes and caseloads, our educators are not able to really know our students, understand their needs, and make those positive connections. A phrase keeps coming to mind, not able to see the forest through the trees. I want to flip that. Because in Salem-Keizer, we're not able to see the trees and the forest. Our educators are focused so much on trying to manage these large forests, they cannot focus on the individual tree. The tree crying out for help. The tree in desperate need of attention. We need to reduce class sizes. In every single class across this district, we have students at need coming from marginalized populations. If we want to truly address the goal of the SIA to lift these students up, we need to reduce class size. I urge you to reject this proposal tonight. Let's rewrite a plan that will focus on a district-wide class size and caseload reduction. Let's help our educators see the trees in the forest, because class size does matter.
Thank you, Tyler. Anna Olivia, followed by Robert Glasgow. Anna Olivia, followed by Robert Glasgow.
Trying to decide whether I would wait too. So, anyway, greetings, Chair and board members, superintendent, and everyone here tonight. My name is Anna Olivia Palazzo, Executive Director of the Salem-Keizer Coalition for Equality. Today I'm speaking about the district's strategies you have before you, and the community spoke collectively about all the incredible ways to improve education and meet the needs of a very diverse group of students with very diverse needs. I was struck from the beginning about the core questions for racial and ethnic groups that have faced historical barriers, asking how can we make students feel like they belong. It will take a combination of many strategies, both academic and social emotional, to take our children across the finish line, and the district has worked hard to put together this draft of some excellent strategies. I have some detailed feedback for the superintendent, but those ideas are absolutely critical, and I hope you will agree to approve them. I want to focus tonight on strategies 1, 5th grade reading, strategy 3, language acquisition, strategy 4, dual language, and strategy 7, community engagement. Language connects all 4 of these strategies, and with it, culture. With these reading and language acquisition strategies, we'll finally be taking advantage of the tremendous asset that our students and families have brought to our city to prepare them for the world with the ability to speak 2 languages and keep their 2 cultures for life and feel like they belong to Salem and Keizer in a bilingual society. My youngest daughter Puerto Rican, Latina, native Spanish and English speaker, just graduated from North Salem and is now at U of O. She graduated with Oregon's biliteracy seal because since 8th grade, when we were forced to transfer to Salem, she was able to attend Parrish and North in a dual language strand in Spanish and English. But we had to drive her to Woodburn to start this journey because in 2006, Salem didn't have the opportunities that we have now. Salem-Keizer schools were still punishing kids back then for speaking Spanish at school, while my daughter excelled in another district speaking 2 languages. While she was a junior, she taught herself a 3rd language, and she's planning to graduate with 4 proficient languages and teach in foreign countries. But the other part of belonging is the family. So fully 50% of our families and students struggle with feeling that they belong. And researchers everywhere have been connecting the dots between the issues of belonging, culture, language, color, history, mental health, and school achievement and life success. So that's why Strategy 7 is so critical. Please connect the dots and trust the priorities of the parents, students, and community members about what will help their children the most, above all the wonderful things we could do for them if we had all the money in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Glasgow. And after Robert, it'll be Laura Mack. Laura, if you could be ready, maybe waiting up here to take over when he's done, please.
Good evening. Since I started working for the district in 2003, the expectations for teachers have changed. We have seen the rise and fall of many trends. Some fade away unexpectedly, some remain, and some are common sense ideas rebranded to appear marketable. Most of these trends are delivered via professional development. Although I usually enjoy PD, I've noticed the worthiness of professional development is often taken for granted once it is set into motion. Small learning communities are a good example. The initiator of the movement reconsidered its worthiness, and all that remains for the hundreds of hours of dedicated PD time are buildings prepared for mini schools within schools and handouts that are no longer applicable to current goals. In this context, I am concerned about the potential of our underrepresented students becoming a secondary focus in a professional development process that is supposed to help them. Will there be safeguards? Will the data presented to show the success be measurable, empirical, and free of spin? If you look at the documentation on ClassSizeMatters.org, you can see evidence that shows how smaller class size supports all students, but especially marginalized students and students of color. I am not convinced that professional development directed at educators is the most efficient way to make marginalized students feel welcome in our district. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Laura Mack. And after Laura, it'll be Joanne Sweeney, if you could be ready. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Mack. I'm a Salem resident and a parent. I'm here to talk about well-rounded education. One of the 4 goals for this legislation was well-rounded education. Where is it in the student investment account or the executive summary? There's one mention of music and theater as an extracurricular activity. That's one sentence in that 5-page report, and it's extracurricular. It's not part of the school day, and it's only middle and high schools. Later in that report, Plan B and Plan C mentions art education, maybe doing it as a pilot in elementary school. That is the district saying loud and clear, there is no art education happening in our elementary schools now. If the public in Salem-Keizer knew there were no art education classes now, it would be at the top of those lists that came from the community meetings. But because we have been misled to believe that art is happening in our schools, it didn't raise the alarms. The alarms weren't raised. Parents see it on their report cards. Parents see it in the school handbook. But art education is not happening in our elementary schools. Okay. Why isn't art ed in elementary a higher priority? Salem-Keizer parents and the board need to know that we need art in elementary school because it's part of a well-rounded education. Kids see school now as repetitive drudgery. Think about Pink Floyd's The Wall. This summary, the executive summary, tries to deal with the symptoms of poorly rounded schools: behaviors, lack of engagement, and poor attendance. Social emotional health is another reason why we need art in our elementary schools. The making of art reduces cortisol levels in the brain, reducing stress for our students, who are suffering in the drudgery of our schools. Social emotional health through art making promotes authentic connections with self, with culture, and with others. It will reduce behavioral problems in our schools. The other thing that art teaches in elementary school is creative thinking skills. They're referred to as the studio habits of mind. They include things like that grit you talked about earlier, risk-taking, observation, reflection, design thinking, and visual literacy. The last thing is engagement. Having art education in elementary schools will provide engagement with parents of color and low-income families. 2 school districts in the nation, Chula Vista and Boston, found that historically underserved populations rated arts programming as essential to a good school, more so than the white parents did. My comments are explored more thoroughly in my printed materials.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Joanne Sweeney. After Joanne, it will be Paula Booth.
Good evening. My name is J.J. Sweeney. I am, in my current incarnation, a substitute teacher with Salem-Keizer Public Schools. As such, I teach all grades, all schools, all subjects. I have taught in 3 school districts starting in 1986, have worn many hats, have seen many ideologies and methodologies come and go, and have taught thousands of kids K through 12. I'm here tonight to address the student investment account and budget priorities for Salem-Keizer Public Schools. I attended last week's board meeting. I applaud the efforts of the task force and was very encouraged by much of what I heard. The first slide of the presentation showed 4 boxes representing input from the community and the resultant priorities. All 4 seemed spot on. The first box was class size. My heart sang. Finally, we were going to focus on the one thing that is a partial solution to any problem facing public education, any problem. The presentation proceeded, and much of what I heard sounded great. For example, putting mental health professionals in every school, my second priority. However, there was no further word about class size. I am hopeful that you, as board members and therefore leaders in public education, are fully aware of the decades of research supporting smaller class sizes. And I know you have heard from the true experts in education, the teachers, that for individualized instruction to occur and to develop relationships, class size must be reduced. Whether a student excels academically and needs a greater challenge, a student with autism with specific triggers, a student with severe ADHD, a student who is traumatized and has socio-emotional issues, a student with dyslexia and other learning disorders, a student with a language barrier, or teenagers who want an opportunity to use their voice, smaller classes means more attention from the teacher and more time. If a middle or high school teacher has essays to read, how much analysis and feedback will occur with 15 kids versus 30, or 90 versus 180? So why has class size not been addressed? Money. Reducing class size means more teacher and therefore more salaries and more benefits and more infrastructure. Clearly, more easily said than done. But we are here tonight to talk about how to use an infusion of funds to better assist our students and improve the quality of education. Education, public service, and social safety net budgets have been cut since the 1980s. For 40 years, we've tried to do more with less. We teachers are like the proverbial frog slowly boiling in the pot. Many teachers are feeling the heat and jumping out. With all due deference to the director who suggested that things have not changed much since when she taught, they have. Aside from budgets shrinking and class size increasing over 4 decades, we now have not just poverty, but generational poverty and its associated behaviors and parenting challenges, as well as negative attitudes toward education. There are significantly more traumatized kids, kids with autism, kids with really severe ADHD, kids with learning disabilities, more kids with asthma and peanut allergies, etc., not to mention the impact of technology and social media. More and more has been put on the teacher's plate, and we now must navigate a classroom environment where teaching is increasingly difficult and plays second fiddle to classroom management. If you truly want to improve the quality of education and get better results, whether measured by tests or graduation rates or people getting jobs or being good citizens, please think outside the box and do what you can to reduce class size. And please listen to your teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula Booth.
Good evening. My name is Paula Booth, and I'm here tonight as a mom of 2 kids in the Salem-Keizer School District. One is in a class with 33 kids in 3rd grade, and I'm here as an art educator. Besides my countless hours of volunteering to write curricula, organize materials, and teach visual art in my children's school, I am also professor of art at Western Oregon University, where I teach art education for pre-service teachers. I'd like to talk a bit tonight about the training our teachers receive in the visual arts before entering a classroom, as well as a few thoughts I've had since I attended last month's school board meeting. At last month's meeting, a couple things happened that made me realize that many folks in the room had a very different idea of what a meaningful visual arts education really is. First off, the board members were presented with delightful portraits of themselves made by school kids. Like all others in the room, I was touched and thrilled to see kids' art take center stage. I am a sucker for kids' art. In no way, however, is that proof that meaningful visual art education is happening in the Salem-Keizer School District. After the meeting, where my colleague Laura Mack presented research on the many benefits of visual arts instruction, I overheard a couple comments from folks that were along the lines of, "My student has art in her classroom, and some teachers do a lot of art." These statements are true, yes, however, they do not reflect a meaningful, sequential, thoughtful, and targeted visual art curriculum, and there is no equity in only some teachers being comfortable teaching art. To say that students who do some art in the classroom or in an after-school program are getting a high-quality visual arts education is akin to me teaching a group of students a song and saying that they are getting a high-quality music education. None of the benefits of art education transfer to students through exposure alone. Before students enter the teacher education program at WU, they are required to take my art education course. Most of my students are of an age that grew up with deep budget cuts and have not themselves benefited from a thoughtful art curriculum in elementary school, so they are already at a disadvantage from teachers who have been in the workforce for a number of years already. Many of my students are terrified by the thought of doing art themselves, let alone writing visual arts curriculum to achieve specific grade level learning outcomes, doing meaningful art with their students, or assessing students' artwork. Over the past 7 years, I have narrowed my own teaching objectives for pre-service arts education to 3 things only: teaching students the vocabulary of art so they might feel comfortable talking about it, teaching students to use basic materials like watercolors or oil pastels so that they might be inspired to use them in a class, and helping my students see small ways to incorporate art into core content areas. In the one and only art class many of our teachers have, they spend only 1 hour total looking over the National Core Arts Anchor Standards and absolutely no time learning best practices or different pedagogical approaches. My one goal is simply that they leave me with a small bit of comfort to even try something in their classroom. This is not high-quality visual arts education. Decades of research show strong and consistent links between high-quality visual arts education and a wide range of impressive educational outcomes, many of which are the very outcomes that Salem-Keizer is attempting to bring forth with a student investment account. Please consider. Thanks.
Shelley Henger. Shelley Henger, and is she in here? Shelley? I don't see her. Okay, Ross, and while Ross is coming up, board members, we have 15 minutes to discuss anything you want to discuss, and we can either talk or we can try to get in a few more. There's still 11 to testify. There's not enough time. So you guys think about what you want to do here, okay?
Good evening, Chair Hyen, directors, and Superintendent Perry. My name is Ross Schwarzenegger. I'm a parent with 3 children in the Salem-Keizer School District. I'm also the outgoing president of the Straub Music Booster Club, and we raise $15,000 every year for Straub Middle School music programs. I'm also a board member of the Music Lessons Project. Now, that project alone has great evidence in it because we pay for private lessons in Title I schools, and now those students with that attention are being able to compete and perform in all city. It's just a matter of money. So today I'd like to talk to you as a member of Open Public Education Network. That is a group of retired teachers, and we've been lobbying for a review of assessments, and I'd like to tell you that not only is the State Board of Education doing an assessment work group, but also now the legislature is doing an assessment work group for early learning. So that's the Oregon, the preschool test. And so we're really excited about the interest that the policymakers are taking in assessments. Now, if you would take a look at what I've provided you, the individual student report, I'd like to say what this report explains how your child performed on the Oregon statewide assessments in English language arts and mathematics. And you can see that both my kids are on each side of this. And if you take a look at the number, it says level 4, that's great. Then you look at the numbers and said that it qualifies as level 2. The big problem here is we opted our kids out of SBAC. So they didn't take this test. They were in the library. So I'm kind of wondering how this gets sent from this district to my home when we opted our kids out of SBAC. And I would state that this is fake news that the district is providing us. And not only is it fake news, but the student investment account is based on this key performance indicator of SBAC. How many other opt-out students are included in your numbers? It's a good question, right? Because you said your opt-out numbers were less this year, even though that the scores went down because more people were in it. I would ask you to, number one, we need more licensed teachers. We need some librarians. Haven't heard that one yet. We need more students engaged. Don't approve this before you get more students. You told us Chromebooks 1-to-1. That's going to raise our scores. Didn't do it. You said ReadyGen was going to raise our scores. Didn't do it. I see unified curriculum for math.
Thank
$2
you,
million
Ross.
could be spent on teachers.
Thank you, Ross. Is everybody okay if I continue the rest of our time with the testimony? Okay, we're going to give you the time we were going to use to talk to get as many of you in as we can. We stop at 9:30. Valerie Duncan. After Valerie will be Mindy Merritt.
Good evening. My name is Valerie Duncan, and I am the art teacher at Claggett Creek Middle School. This is my third year at Claggett, and before that, I taught for 9 years in the state of Arkansas as a K-6 art teacher. In Arkansas, there is a state mandate that there must be a certified art teacher on every public school campus. This law has been in effect since around 2005 or 6. When I moved to Oregon to be closer to my parents, I was shocked to find out that Salem-Keizer did not have certified art teachers in the elementary schools. So I took a job at the middle school level. From the first day, I was astounded at the lack of knowledge 6th to 8th grade students have about art. I was told that their regular classroom teacher taught them art, but my experience is that they might know how to mix colors, but that's about it. There are a few students who have the privilege to take art classes outside the school, but those students are few and far between. Students in Arkansas receive art starting at kindergarten and some at pre-K. Students get art once a week in rotation with music, PE, library, etc. That gives them 36 art classes a year taught by a certified art teacher. By the time those students get through 6th grade, they have had 252 rigorous art classes that develop their creativity and creative problem-solving skills, analyzing and evaluating skills, which is all the criteria for Bloom's higher-level thinking skills. The things I'm teaching middle school students in Salem-Keizer are the skills I started teaching at kindergarten students in Arkansas. By not offering art to elementary students in Salem-Keizer district, you are starting them off at a disadvantage. Other districts in Oregon and other states are realizing the value of art education in schools. Art is so integrated into our culture that most people are unaware of it and its importance to the economy. From your smartphone to what you wear every day to your pens and your coffee cup, everything around us was designed by a person. Starting Salem-Keizer students well behind other students receiving arts education is doing them a disservice. Today's jobs and jobs in the future will be looking for creative problem solvers and creative risk takers to be part of their teams. Salem-Keizer graduates don't deserve to be left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. And after Mindy will be Courtney Clendening.
Hi, Chair Han, Superintendent Perry. My name is Mindy Merritt and the board. I reside in Salem, Oregon. Tonight I'm speaking as the president of Salem-Keizer Education Association on behalf of our licensed teachers, the union, representing over 2,200 members. On May 8th, 2019, educators, students, families, and our community rallied together and shared the strong, powerful message to all students in Oregon: you matter. SKEA, there we go, sorry, I had lost my spot. SKEA has an affirmation that boldly states and reaffirms that we are a welcoming and inclusive union who unequivocally and without reservation will do everything within the scope of our ability to protect all of our students, their families, our members, and our extended community from any efforts by both individuals and entities meant to harm and prevent engagement and participation in a safe and caring educational environment. The student investment account and the way in which our district chooses how to spend the 35 million plus funds directly relates to that affirmation. Educational equity, as defined by ODE, the Oregon Department of Education, and the Student Success Act, really relates to, when you look at the equity definition, it states, implementation values is the equitable implementation of policy, practices, procedures, and legislation that translates into resource allocation, education rigor, and opportunities for historically and currently marginalized youth, students, and families, including civil rights protected classes. This means dismantling and restructuring of systems and institutions that create a dichotomy of beneficiaries over oppressed and marginalized peoples. So, what that means is all means all. So, we've come together as a task force. We've come together through surveys, and we've listened. And as much as we've heard about the plan, and unfortunately, we haven't heard a lot of input about what the teachers have said, and I haven't heard a lot of input about what the staff has said. And out of 22,000 student surveys that were sent out, only 508 were received. And when our task force, community task force, asked for those student surveys to be sent back and to be redone, and when Panorama was suggested as a substitute, we specifically said no, that was not acceptable. And it wasn't done.
Thank you, Mindy. Courtney?
Thank you.
Followed by Kelly Davis, or Kellery Davis, sorry.
Chair Hine, Superintendent Perry, thank you. My name is Courtney Clendenning. I reside in Keizer, Oregon. I'm here today to remind you that we have 6 comprehensive high schools, 11 comprehensive middle schools, and 42 elementary schools. The bulk of this plan is targeting 2 high schools, 2 middle schools, and 8 or maybe 16 elementary schools. 70% of our students are economically disadvantaged. We have students who are part of the SIA targeted subgroups throughout our entire district in all 59 plus schools, not just the 12 to 20 targeted. And as an elementary teacher, it also saddens me to see the emphasis of resource allocation in this plan being focused on middle and high school. I absolutely see a need across the district for students and to meet the needs of students and families listed in Strategy 7 and Strategy 9. These strategies are really listening to and hearing our community and family needs. But it is my belief that this money can and should be used for more innovative, groundbreaking ideas that help all of our underserved students across the district, not just our marginalized students at our targeted schools, 12 to 20 of them. We are leaving behind students at 39 to 47 of our 59 schools, and we are using Band-Aids to heal broken bones in a small part of our district. We can do better. We must do better with these funds to dismantle and restructure our systems.
Thank you, Kellery Davis. And then the last person will be Kelsey Dunlap. For those of you who did not get an opportunity, you should have our email. I believe most of you are district staff. I hope you will email us and share what you're thinking, okay? We really want to hear from you. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, Chairperson and Board and Superintendent Perry. I'm not Kellery Davis. I'm Charlie Blackwell. We are on the same team at Chavez Elementary, and we are both residents of Salem. Mrs. Davis needed to needed to go home, so I will be reading her statement.
Okay, what was your name again?
Charlie Blackwell.
Thank you.
The need for social emotional support in elementary classrooms is at an all-time high. The students and the staff can all benefit from programs and trainings to better understand and help our students obtain what they need to be successful. Mrs. Davis is grateful to see that this is on the priority list. Providing more opportunities for students to have contact with mental health professionals, staff members to have more training to better support their students, as well as more support in the building overall, will undoubtedly help to foster a better and more successful learning environment.
Thank you. Wow, we might actually get one more. Kelsey, if you
here.
go quick, we can do
I'm
one
gonna
more.
go so quick. My name is Kelsey Dunlap. I live in Salem, and I teach science at McKay High School. On May 8th, 2019, nearly 3,000 educators and community members marched on the Capitol to fight for the Student Success Act, and we won. I marched on the Capitol on May 8th wearing this shirt and brandishing a bullhorn, specifically to fight for smaller class sizes, because class size matters. I did not walk out on May 8th so that more than a quarter of the money we fought for and won would go to purchasing new curriculum and providing professional development. In addition to years of experience, our teachers have bachelor's, master's, and even doctorate degrees. We already attend professional development at our sites and on our own time, evenings, weekends, and vacations. Speaking for myself, I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, a Master of Arts in Teaching, and I've earned 27 graduate credits beyond that in teaching English to speakers of other languages, reading instructions, and the Envoy Classroom Management Trilogy. Salem-Keizer Public Schools already employs experts in teaching and learning. We are called teachers. And we don't need new curriculum, and we are pretty professionally developed. McKay High School had a median class size of 30 students in the 2018-2019 school year, the largest of the district. I meet an average of 180 new students in September. Professional development and culturally relevant teaching and social emotional learning certainly has a place as we work to support all of our students, but no amount of professional development helps me learn 180 new names, especially when my class sizes approach 40 and many classes 40, 41, 42, 43, up to 46. It does not help me provide individual feedback on 40 lab reports so they can improve their writing and math skills, and it certainly doesn't help me learn their stories, which is absolutely essential if I am going to support their social and emotional health. I am discouraged by this proposal's neglect of our educators' #1 priority, reducing class size, so that we can support all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. I guess we have time for you. Dawn Matthews, come on down. Dawn Matthews is not here. Okay. Veronica Sedlacek is last one. We're trying to find the last person here, and we're running out of time. Maribel Pina must be gone. Tiffany, I know. Oh, Maribel's there.
Director Haynes, Superintendent Perry, and Board of Directors. My name is Maribel Peña, and I live in Salem. As a bilingual teacher, I am very hopeful to see that language acquisition and second language learning is a focus for this plan. I appreciate your thinking of training need of PD and resources. I especially like the resources to support mental health and in schools and after-school programs. Dr. Sproles, thank you for saying that our students come to assess and gifts. All our students do. And I feel validated by my job. I feel validated in my job by your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's 9:30, and we're going to adjourn for the last two, unless people want to go over just a little bit.
Two more.
All right, we're going to go for the last two. Tiffany, come on down. Price is right. And Rita Glass, you get to close up, so please be ready to talk.
Good
Come on,
evening.
Tiffany.
Okay. Hi, Superintendent Perry, Chairwoman. Thank you, Board of Volunteers, for being here and listening to public testimony. Without intentionally listening, we can't move forward and fix our educational system. My name is Tiffany Karstensen. I live in Salem, and I'm here to support Dr. Richardson's warnings last week. We must take advantage of this rare opportunity. We must be bold, We must stand up to those who will push for the status quo pedagogy, even when that pressure comes from our peers or district-level decision makers. I come to you tonight not only as a community member, but as a parent of a recent McKay graduate and a teacher of grades 6 through 12 in our district. And I come with some supports and some warnings of my own. See, 19 years as a parent and 25 years as an educator of grades 4 through 12 have allowed me to learn some very important pedagogical lessons. I'm hoping to convey these, to share them with you, and I ask fellow staff to give some snaps or an amen if you've learned these as well. Lesson 1, be wary of the word more. Sometimes more is not better. More teachers of color and other types of diversity, yes. More instructional coaches, more seat time, not so much. More math does not equal better math. In fact, several years ago when freshmen at McKay were forced to schedule double math and double language arts at the loss of electives, their attendance plummeted. That's not an equation for high graduation rates. So be careful of how more is implemented as we work on our SSA and SIA. Lesson 2, I get to skip because it was already addressed, because yeah. Lesson 3, kids living in poverty need more than fee waivers and transportation to participate in after-school activities. The majority of students that struggle with participating in my theater program do so because they either need to get to a job to help support their family expenses, or they need to babysit their siblings so their parents can get to work. So yes, let's reduce participation and registration fees for sports and music and theater, and let's create free daycares in our target middle school and high schools, and then hire our students on flexible schedules, allowing them to earn money and be a part of those after-school activities. Lesson 4, class size matters. Across the board, not just in select areas. It matters. I have a confession. I don't know if I can do it in 40 seconds, but I'll try. My husband and I are public school teachers who sent their child to private school K through 8. It wasn't, don't stab me. It wasn't because private school teachers are better. They're not. It's because when we showed up to her first day of kindergarten at her assigned elementary school, there were 35 students in that class with no signs of an IA or another teacher to be hired. The private school down the street with really particular criteria and more tuition than we can afford without my parents' help capped their classes at 20, K through 8. 20. As parents working in education, we saw firsthand how much our teachers could give in supporting Josie's character development and learning styles and academic rigor.
Thank you, Tiffany.
I was so
Rita.
close.
Yeah.
I'll send you the long version.
Yes, send me the long version, please. Rita, you get to close it up.
Hello, Chair Hyen, Vice Chair Lippold, Superintendent Perry, and members of the board. And Paul, hi. I don't know if he's still with us, but I thank you for your work and the staff's work on the SIA plan. I do have several concerns. My name is Rita Glass, and I live in Northeast Salem, and I am here tonight as the president of the Association of Salem-Keizer Support Professionals, and speaking on behalf of our members. I do have several concerns with the plan because, as our last person just said, watch out for the word more. A couple of concerns I do have is that with all the additional staff that this is going to create, which some are very needed as teachers and so forth, I'm not sure we need all the coordinators, but some are. Okay, but I do know with all that and the support staff and that comes more work for office staff. And there was no mention about school office staff support and other office staff support when they'll have to do time and everything else with this additional staff in their buildings and their departments in there. So that's a really big concern of mine. Also, another concern is having been a CSOC, I love that job. That we're only saying 6 hours. I think this plan needs to say 8 hours. Our community was clear across the board about having those connections. 6 hours are student contact hours. They want more, the community and parents, that you cannot do in those 6 hours when you're dealing with students and connecting parents or students with resources. Those additional hours need to be used for engagement for parents, which is one of the CSOC's jobs in their job description. They will engage them, and to limit them to 6 hours and to leave the other 2 hours they can if they want doesn't leave equitable, as we have seen cuts to our CSOCs in Title I. So that also for a community school resource specialist. We all know that Penny and Dwight have done amazing things. They need to be 12 months, and they also need to be 8 hours. Summer is critical to reach those students who can possibly go to summer school not coming, to keep them engaged so we don't lose them during those months. Also, language services. That clerical position also needs to be 8 hours.
Thank you, Rita. You can
Thank
submit
you.
your whole testimony to us, and we will read it
Sure.
if you want to.
I will.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out and participating this evening. This is what we like to see. We are adjourned.